All right, everybody listening, this is Harbor Discussions. It's like number 13, I think. And I'm here with the ladies in S.C.U.M, the Society for Cutting Up Misogynists, a feminist punk band from Baltimore, Maryland. If y'all would like to introduce yourselves by name and your role in the band.
I'm Kayla, I do vocals.
I'm Madeline, I play guitar.
I'm Mac, I'm on drums.
I'm Abigail, I'm bass.
Cool, and just tell the people like what social medias you're on for the band and like where they can listen to the music.
We have an Instagram at S.C.U.M Band Official. And
S.C.U.M_Band Official.
Oh, okay.
The underscore does matter.
Yeah.
S.C.U.M_Official, and you can listen to us. What?
S.C.U.M_Band Official.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're on Spotify and Bandcamp
Yes.
and Apple Music.
Yeah, everything. We also do have a Facebook page, though I forget to update it. We're the only two admins on it, I think.
I do the same thing with this. I have a Twitter and a Facebook. I barely
Oh, I
post
think I
on
made
it.
a Twitter, but I forgot about it, so that doesn't count either.
Literally, I've been in the band for like a year and a half, and I'm just like learning about social medias I didn't know we had.
It's because I didn't use it.
There's a reason it's a job. There's a reason places hire people to do social media.
I'm
much
so
work.
bad at it. I'm sorry. But everything is linked through a link in the Instagram, so that's the only one that matters.
That's our main one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's what everyone uses. So like, and I told them earlier, feel free. We can talk about absolutely anything. I have a whole bunch of like feminism discussion points to talk about,
Oh,
but you know, we could literally talk about whatever. So if there's something you want to talk about. And I kind of want this to be a learning experience for me. You know, I want to get a better female perspective, and if y'all want to get a better male perspective, you know, just you know, if you want to get my perspective on anything, just ask. So, what parts of Maryland? Just talk about like the parts of Maryland you grew up in, and then what you would describe growing up there. How was it like?
3 out of 4 of us are actually originally from Carroll County.
Yeah.
I'm an interloper. I grew up in Annapolis,
Okay.
which is pretty boring. Most of the times when I hung out with friends as a teenager, it's either at the mall or it was like on this bike trail or the woods.
That's how it is here.
Yeah.
We at least us two were mall rats, me and Mac.
And we just had like a crazy basement punk scene for whatever reason when
Yeah.
I was in high school, so
Oh, that's cool, actually.
that was cool.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. That's like the only place I hung out at was the town mall, and it.
Oh yeah, are you from here too?
Yeah, I've grown up in Westminster my whole life, so. I'm surprised I haven't. When did you guys hang out at the mall? Like what years? I guess?
2012 to 2016.
Oh, okay.
That was a quick answer.
That was the high school years predominantly that I would have
Okay.
been at the mall.
All right,
I gotcha. So that was. I think that was before I was there and whatnot. But like, what was that like at the time? Probably not different at all.
No, awesome, because there was actually a lot of stuff there. And were you there for the mug shot? Fuck, I can't talk. The coffee shop mug shots.
Yes, I was talking about that with my friends, and I couldn't remember the name of it. It was mug
That
shots.
was okay. Well, I went to Winter's Mill, and that's walking distance from the mall. So what you would do is after school, you just walk to the mall, go into mug shots. You had special permission already to abandon your backpacks under one table to the side and just spend all evening there.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
It was
really
fun.
fun.
It was awesome.
Yeah, there was really like no hangout spots when I went there. Like literally, it was a place I guess where people just met up to smoke weed. And that was pretty much it. And like we would just like go into FYE and look at the metal section of CDs and whatnot.
I'm sorry, for a second I was just thinking about you looking at metals. Like, you got titanium, iron, steel.
That's kind of what it's like around here.
No, because at that time there was mug shots, and then right across the way there was Save Point, which was a retro game store and also arcade.
That place
where
was dope.
It had everything. You would just like buy an
That's
hour.
in Union Bridge now.
They had a bunch of
Oh, I
Xboxes.
have
Oh.
issues with that guy, but still, it was fun at the
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
As if it's under the same
I
management.
only met the woman, so.
Oh,
Right.
there was no woman there at the
Oh,
time.
okay. Maybe not. Or maybe I am thinking about. Anyway.
But yeah,
Maybe that many.
was never at like the mall era. I went to the same high school as Mac, but like we hung out like twice in high school. Where it was like it would have made sense for us to be friends, but just
Yeah.
nothing ever happened.
We also lived really close to each other.
We lived very close to each other. But then I ended up meeting Kayla through like these basement shows like later. Just more like not meeting her directly, but us knowing the same people eventually, which kind of led to this. But yeah, like there was just at the end of high school, one of my friends who was like a little bit older, you know, like 19, 20, he had basement shows, and then that was really cool because that was the first time I was in like Carroll County, and I got to like actually meet people from other schools because like we grew up out in Hampstead,
Okay.
so like there's nowhere that you can go around there. Nobody comes to Hampstead to hang out the same way that like people who live in Westminster, like people come to Westminster to hang out. So yeah, that was cool having just like that central basement venue. But when we'd have other bands out, like one time we had Hellbent out from Essex, and they were like,
Nice.
"Yo, where can we find an ATM around here?" Because we're like, "Sorry, it's in this kid's basement. It's cash only." And he was like, "Where can we find an ATM around here?" And we're like, "If you drive like 10 minutes out, you'll find a 7-Eleven." And he was just like, "Y'all are some young ass kids in the middle of fucking nowhere." And I was like, "I guess we are. I didn't think about that before."
Yeah, a bunch of cornfields and shit.
Yeah.
So you kind of started to talk about how you met already, but I guess kind of talk about how the band formed and whatnot, how your like musical interests collided aside from the basement
Oh.
shows and stuff.
Well, I had a lot of thoughts on feminism and also really wanted to be in a band for a long time ever since I started going to like those basement shows because it just sort of seemed fun. And I had this urge to do it. So like there's this era in which like on my personal Facebook, every so often I would be like, all right, it's time. Is anyone interested? And usually some people would like offer, and then like we'd have something seemingly going for a little bit and it would like falter. And then there's just this one time, it's actually been like a couple years now because it came up in my memories, where Matt commented and was like, yeah, let's do it. I can keep a beat on drums. And then also, whereas at that time I was living in the city with some other roommates and we had like a row home. And we had, stuff in the basement. I assumed you'd do it there. She was like, my roommate, her then roommate, has this garage with all these instruments in it. We could just practice there. So I went over there, and we tried to have the first SCUM practice. It was me, her, and her roommate just sort of joined us. And then he later became the guitarist for a bit, and then the bassist until he was eliminated.
Yeah,
So aggressive.
yeah. There was a post where you like announced it and like
yeah, the Mudasir meme parody.
A lot of
Yeah.
people were like, "Yo, what happened?" It's like, if we announced it like that, how can you not tell it's fine? Like that we literally were like all got together. We're like, okay,
In the
let's
same
take
room.
some
Well,
mean
right. What
picture.
had happened was she and I were like the only members, and it was his garage, and he just kind of like came out with us, and then he just sort of stayed in it until we got a replace.
He was
So
supposed
that
to be
was-
a temporary
That was
member.
the thing, is it was us two, and then my friend Kat, who also lived in the city, was interested, so they became our bassist for a little bit. And I was looking to replace him. His name is Elijah. I was looking to replace Elijah on guitar, and then there was like the first show that any of us went to, like July 2021, coming back from
Right
COVID.
after
It was a
COVID, I
house
went
show
to,
at the Ulaloom Kids house.
Yeah, I went to a house show because it was in Towson, and I was like, it was really cool. After COVID, because like before COVID, I was going to a lot of house shows and stuff. But I was like the younger kid there, and then like all of a sudden I came back after COVID, and I'm like, oh, I know like one band who's playing this show. I'll go to it. I'll probably run into people I know there. And I'd go, and maybe I'd know a couple people in the bands, but like all of a sudden, like I was like 4 years older than everybody else there, and I was like, what? Okay. But I went to this show, like, oh, cool, I'll just run into people. I'll just go by myself. Other than like one band that I just kind of knew, I only knew Kayla, and then not even like really, like we had talked at a party like a year ago, like once. And so we just knew of each other, and she had known my old band and mentioned like, yeah, no, I have this band, but like we're looking for some people, like, do you play anything? And I said like, yeah, I play guitar and I play bass. Like I had played bass like once.
She
and I
lied
owned
and
a
said,
guitar.
yeah, I
lied.
play guitar.
Yeah, I lied. So I lied. She just knew I had been in a band before because I was a vocalist in that old band, which was like Westminster based.
what was the band name
Ex-Opioids.
called? Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Because half of them are in Succotash now.
Yeah,
So,
they
yeah.
were my third interview, I think. Third or
Yeah.
fourth, yeah.
So yeah, that just dissolved during COVID or whatever. And I did really miss being in a band. Obviously, I really miss shows because that had been such an important part of my life then. And then a lot of things I got to change in the meantime. So yeah, I lied because I was like, I just want to be in a band. I'll figure it out.
It was funny because at that time, like Elijah wasn't even on our group chat. I added Maddie, and I was like, okay, good. We have a full band now, like actually without like our temporary member. And then Kat never got to play a show with us because they impulsively moved to Minnesota.
Oh.
Like very shortly after that, we never
I
all
never
four
met
practiced
Kat.
together.
I never
then-
met Kat.
You met Kat once.
Oh yeah, once, but there was a no, but we were in a band at the same time. No, later. But
no, so then
hypothetical
Elijah's
moment.
fill-in
that
position
lineup-
shifted from guitar to bass.
that lineup like technically existed, but like never even got in the same room for a practice.
Yeah. Kat is involved in some ways, though. They're the person I'm talking to on the track before Scorn Hub, where it's just like 4 minutes of discussion, which a lot of people have come to me and said they think is her.
Really?
Including people that we know. Like, my roommate was like,
Oh,
oh, when
I didn't
Maddie
know
was
that.
talking about it, I'm like, that's not Maddie.
Okay. But yeah, and then Abigail, when we played a show where Kayla had to play bass.
We played a couple shows.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
where Kayla had to play bass because just whatever worked out. Like, we agreed to a show, and then, like, you know, not all of us could make it. And Kayla didn't love doing that. Like, could do it pretty well. She won't say that, but,
I don't like it.
but she doesn't like it. But we played
can't
that,
do
like,
both at the same
temporary
time.
show. And, Abigail was just like, yeah, if you ever need a bassist, like, I live in Westminster, too, and also, like, I play
yeah,
bass,
at
and we
Fort
were like,
Armistead.
oh,
Right,
okay,
that is how we met
cool.
you.
Yeah, cool. It's because, okay, my boyfriend, a friend, like one of his friends knew about the Armistead show, invited us. He couldn't end up going, so it was just Matt and me. Matt was wearing like polo shirts and khakis because that's what he always wears, and I was wearing like a summer dress
Yeah,
because
it was
that's
a
what I always
beautiful
wear.
sundress.
Yeah, and I didn't have my sun hat. I knew that would be too much. Also, I was wearing sandals. But yeah, we showed up and we rocked out to the music, and everyone was looking at us like we came from space. And then I started talking to, I think it might have been Diana.
Yeah, my roommate, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my gosh, I live in Westminster. And
Because that's so fun when you go somewhere else and you're like, oh my god, you're from Carroll County too.
yeah, no, it's like, which I know logically it's not that far from like Baltimore.
Yeah, we were like 40 minutes away maybe.
Well, it's
like
also
that.
just like weirder finding that like after you're like you haven't lived there before. Like
Right.
after if you're from there and you
Yeah,
move
'cause I'm not
somewhere
from
else, and
here.
then and then someone's just like, oh, I moved there.
Westminster
Why?
by choice.
Westminster by
It's
choice.
like I
yeah.
left there.
I think it looks good on paper, you know?
Yeah.
Like they show pictures of Main Street, like all the businesses and like some of the nicer areas.
Well,
and
that's
it's
yeah.
like,
I mean, I've had people like come visit and they'll like walk down Main Street with me and they're like, "This place is so nice. I would love to live here." It's like you don't understand. It like looks cool. There's nothing here.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
I had friends be like, "Oh,
You
is
want a
there like
bike
cute
fix?
stuff around here? Like, is there like cute shops?" And I'm like, "No,
not really.
Because
Not-
it kind of looks like Ellicott City, but it is very much not Ellicott
Yeah,
City.
yeah.
yeah.
We just have old stuff."
I
That's
mean,
cool.
it's less depressing than like the sprawl suburbs and stuff
yeah.
where a lot of people live. Like I went to college out in Salisbury, and like I like never left campus, not because I couldn't, but it's just like everything was just like Walmart, strip mall, decay.
Yeah.
It was just depressing as hell.
Yeah, that's the mall in Westminster now. I meant to bring this up earlier with that whole discussion.
It
like,
always comes back.
we
to
don't
the
even
mall.
have an Auntie Anne's in there now. They took
I
that
know.
out.
No, there's no
How can you
chain
go to a mall and not
restaurants
get a
anymore in
pretzel?
there.
Thank you.
They do make pretzels there still. The
Oh.
new replacement place does make pretzels.
Ah, I forgot.
Uncle
Okay.
M's.
That's a little better.
They're like a Wish ripoff of Auntie Anne's. Auntie M's, whatever it is called.
But no, it's just sad what that mall's
Should
become.
turn it into a venue.
We know someone who like proposed that they had like an evening thing there, and apparently the owner was like, "That's exactly what we need. More kids running around there," like sarcastically, and it's like,
Spend
"Sir,
money."
this mall is dead.
That's what you need, bud.
No, it's
yeah.
just
There's
funny 'cause
nothing
I've
here."
tried to talk to like older people who like used to run like DIY spaces and stuff back in the day, and they all proposed stuff that's like wild to me that it worked out for them as much as they did. But like the owner of like 10 Car Pile Up in Towson, he sometimes books shows like there's like a kind of like VFW space above it. But he was like, yeah, you know, if you really want to book a show, just like all these empty storefronts, just figure out from the county who owns them, and just like, you know, say like, hey, can we rent this out for the night for an event? And I'm like, people used to go for that. Like, I guess I don't know. Like,
Yeah,
I just feel like people would. I just feel like people would be like, no, I'm not letting you, because he's like, all you have to do is do it once, and then they won't let you back, and that's fine because you already threw your show. But I'm like,
Right.
I don't think they'll let us do it once. Like,
Yeah, no doubt. I feel like you just got to get cool with some business owners, you know.
yeah.
But not all places can handle that sort of.
Have friends
sort of
with big
thing.
yards. That was the biggest thing about being in high school and going to shows, because again, we had them in like a friend's like relative's house, and then getting to like your early 20s and like a lot of people just don't have a house with a basement. Like a lot of people have apartments and stuff.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. You lose a lot of venues when you don't live with your parents.
Yeah, you lose a lot of just like big space that people have because it's their parents, which kind of sucks as far as like, I don't know, like there's a difference between the shows at like Fort Armistead are really cool, but like, and obviously now we know like, you know, the cops are cool with it, but I don't know, especially once you get to the age where it's like, oh shit, they could arrest you.
Yeah.
That's not as fun anymore.
Yeah, that's a fact. I've actually thought about I've thought in my head about throwing shows in here. I'm like, it could be done.
That would get terrifying.
Actually, in Salisbury, there was a space about this big that I'd go to. We would just absolutely cram people in.
Well, that
in a
Towson show that we
disturbing
went
way.
to was about this size, but also someone broke their arm.
Yeah.
That's kind of where it gets fun, though.
Yeah.
I don't know. They were nice though. I once dropped my glasses while moshing, and people stopped so I could pick them up.
Nice.
People who know how to mosh, this is a big issue of mine, especially going back
Yeah.
after COVID. I really feel for a lot of these kids. Because again, I'm just on the younger end of it where, like, I'm 22 right now. So, right before COVID, I was going to shows and stuff, like, 2018, 2019, you know, like, being 18 or 19 and still be on the younger end of people there. And then coming back after COVID, and a lot of these kids were, like, 16, 17, and they just spent the last 2 years of their life inside. Like,
Yeah.
didn't even get to hang out with their friends, like, hang out at high school. So they just, like, didn't know how to mosh. Like, that was just the reality of it. They didn't realize there was, like,
Think of that.
yeah.
It's real.
Yeah, but they didn't realize that, like, there's certain courtesies you have to follow, like, not trampling someone's wrist until they break it.
Right.
For instance, yeah.
Yeah, or just, you know, this being mindful of the space around you and that kind of stuff. So that was just a weird thing to observe because I would have thought of it otherwise.
Yeah. The thing is, there's a back room back there. So, what I would probably do is be like, all right, if you don't mind being near the violence, stay up here. But, the back room, I guess, would be safety,
Yeah.
Controlled area.
Yeah, the basement show that we went to was pretty much like that, in that there was, like, it was a basement that was kind of split horizontally, like, 2 rooms, so there was, like, I mean, I just really respected it, because, if I had a basement like that, I never would have been, like, let's throw a show in it. I also, like, never had, like, cool parents like that, who would just throw a show, so that was always interesting to me, finding out how many of these kids, like, their parents weren't into music or whatever, they just, like, let them throw shows because they wanted their kid to have a social life after COVID.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, though. I haven't brought it up to them, but I know my dad wouldn't care.
Yeah.
I would just have to go around and talk to the neighbors and stuff.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It all boils down to, like, cool neighbors. That kind of ended up being the thing with our space that we had at the garage. Like, not sure what the future of that is, just because,
The one on
neighbors,
PAF?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. I've only
Tension.
gone to one show there, but I really liked it.
yeah, the neighbors were, it gets so loud there. Like, even when we're practicing, like, loud.
Our former bassist is the guy who has it, rents it, doesn't own it,
Ah,
which is already a thing. But yeah, aside from the general hazards, he had 2 noise shows back to back. That
Yeah.
place is not insulated. It's
Oh, it's a box. It is
Yeah.
like plywood.
oh yeah, literally, when I was outside during the bands playing, I could literally see, the floor shaking,
I
the
was
lights
so fucking
shaking.
scared.
Yeah. No, I tell people, like, at the first couple shows, we had, like, no moshing and stuff.
yeah. There was an
And I
hard
tell
no
people, like,
moshul at
no
first.
moshing, and people would be like, no moshing? It's like,
As soon as
Look
you
at
get
this
up there,
thing.
as soon as you feel the soft spot,
Yeah.
no floor should have
No,
something
the very
called
first
soft
time I was up there, because we used to, when we first started practicing together, we would just do it in one of those first bays. But when I first was up there, I didn't walk around the non-carpeted area because it was that plywood. I was like, this feels unsafe for me, one person, to be standing on.
And then we would have, like, 40 people
Oh
up
yeah,
there.
yeah. I honestly, the thought occurred in my head. I was like, I imagined everybody just falling.
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
Like, what a way to go.
I'm prepared for this.
Especially when we were having shows where we were having, like, and again, none of us are very old. Like, we would be on the older end of the bands playing. For some of these shows, it'd be a lot of bands that were, like, early 20s, like, even, like, teenagers and stuff. So, like, everybody coming was in high school. And I'm like, people's parents are gonna sue the shit out of us, and we
Liability.
have nothing. We have
Absolutely.
nothing for them.
Well,
The
we
good
don't know
news
the
is it wasn't
property.
ours.
Yeah.
It was just him doing
But
it.
still, it was just.
We were associated with it. We would
Yeah.
got in trouble in the scene.
Well, I was sort of like, what would my obituary look like if I just like plummeted through the floor? How would my parents find out?
But
How
yeah,
would they
I think
explain
it's like.
that? My
That's
dad
a
would have to
headline
know what
for
hardcore
sure.
is.
It's like 40 kids just falling through the floor in a garage.
That's a bad headline for sure. Like, kids die at local show.
It was cool enough, actually. Like, there were enough cool neighbors where it's like, we're just having these shows that's so random. Old guy would come by and be like, this is so cool. I heard you guys out here the other week, and I figured I had to see it for myself. And, like, they're like, this is so cool. It's just like the 80s, like, blah, blah, blah. And there'd
That's
be
what's
enough
up.
cool neighbors, but
It
unfortunately, we
takes
just.
one.
Yeah, well, it took more than one, but, obviously, we saw the cool ones. We did not see the ones who were sitting inside waiting for it to turn.
Oh yeah, they're
10 so
never
they could
gonna
call
come
the
out.
cops.
You know, they're gonna stay
We were
inside.
always respectful of noise time too, though. So
yeah, I do remember someone being like, "Yeah, the cops will show up at some point just to make
what
sure."
show were you at?
It was the bedroom floor.
Okay.
Elsewhere.
Oh, I wasn't at that one. We were doing something.
We weren't
else.
at that one. Were you there?
Yeah, I've been at
Yeah,
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I think it was Brian introduced us at the time.
Oh, you know Brian?
Yeah, so like I was at my friend Larry's house and he was just kind of there for his it was his birthday celebration, I think. So he was just kind of there and then he recognized me. He was like one of the only people I recognized at that show. So it was kind of like I immediately was just like, "Yo, homie, what's up?" Cuz I'm looking around like, "Oh boy."
It is crazy. I mean, obviously we've had a lot of like York bands and stuff roll through, like York Harrisburg bands, because that's some bands that we play with, like an area that we know well.
And coming from Annapolis, this is Pennsylvania.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
This is basically
The vibes are a bit
Pennsylvania
different.
too. But it was cool that people would like show the fuck out from like far as fuck away for this, and it's like, welcome. I don't know what you were expecting.
It's funny that you said it's basically Pennsylvania because on The Wire it was like the last season of the show and it was based upon like media and it was about this like newspaper. I guess it was about the Baltimore Sun
Yeah.
or whatever. And this news reporter basically got relocated because of, you know, something that she did on the job. And she got relocated to Carroll County and she was like, "Oh, they might as well just fucking move me to Pennsylvania at this point."
I mean, yeah.
It just made me laugh because like you never hear Carroll County getting referenced, and like the one time
That's
it was
amazing.
referenced.
Didn't know
The
that
only other media reference I can think of is in like the 4th season of Hoarders. There's a house on 27. house.
So we have The Wire and 4th season of Hoarders.
Yeah, yeah. The last season of Wire.
Local
yeah.
pride. Local pride.
Yeah, so especially being around other bands or whatever, and like, I mean, we really just say that we're from Baltimore, especially, well, no,
Well,
two
no,
of
like
us
yeah,
are around
and
there.
she's moving soon. I
Yeah.
think. So like,
So the scales will shift again, but like out of state, it made more sense to be like,
Yeah,
Well, no
Baltimore
one knows
area.
where that is. It's like if I'm out of country, I like tell people I'm from DC. If I'm like in country but far away from the East Coast or whatever, I tell people I'm from like Baltimore.
yeah.
And if I'm in, it's like
yeah,
if I'm in
Yeah.
Maryland, I tell people where I'm actually from.
yeah,
Yeah, you go like, "I'm from Westminster, Maryland." They're like, "Huh?"
yeah.
They're like, "It's rural Maryland, 40 minutes from Baltimore." They're like, "Oh,
I once saw a
okay."
British
do
guy
some
bat
cool
and had
stuff
to like
out
back
there.
pedal.
Nah, there's a cool scene out here, but it's like you gotta know about it, you know?
Yeah.
is there still a scene out here?
I just mean in general, you know, like there's stuff to do, there's places to go, but like unless you're a local, I guess you don't really know.
Well, it's like the first year I moved here. It's like I didn't know because I didn't know anyone, so there was like nothing for me to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing is like when I say the music scene that we had back in like 2017, 2018, it was really just because again, it was easy to have people's parents' houses and stuff. And just that like everybody was in high school, we literally had like nothing else to do. A lot of us then just like want to book shows and like figure that stuff out. And for a lot of us, I know, like, when I was in high school, like, I wasn't allowed to go to shows in the city, so it's like, let's just take those bands and bring them to us instead. And that's, like, literally what we did.
Yeah. I feel like it's hard though out here. And like COVID kind of helped kill like the local Carroll County scene, you know? Because
Yeah,
like,
the 2 Westminster venues are kaput.
yeah, and like pretty much both house venues, right? What venues
Yeah.
are you speaking of?
The Spider Dome and the headquarters.
Yeah, I've been to the headquarters. I've never been to the Spider Dome though, but yeah, it's like this place is so small. That's pretty much all there can be is DIY spots,
It's
unless.
like Salisbury, where COVID hit, and just like everyone lost touch with each other. Especially
Yeah.
because like a lot of people were in the university there,
Yeah.
so we all just sort of like moved home and just never saw each other again. So who knows what's going on there now?
Yeah, I feel like it'll all kind of bounce back, though. It just takes time, and people that are.
yeah. I mean, it's exciting. It's not like it really. Obviously, it went away here, but then it's just like changing in other places. I think that's cool, like the Fort Armistead shows and stuff. And yeah, getting to go to these shows where I just got to meet all these people like immediately after COVID. That I wouldn't have met otherwise, just because there were so few shows to go to. There was just like this really awesome time where there like wasn't enough shows for like basically all these different genres to be playing different shows. So there'd be just like hardcore bands and like weird noise bands and like indie pop bands like all playing the same shows. And that's how it was in Westminster, obviously, because
Yeah.
it didn't have big enough scene to
Yeah,
have
I never
like
thought of
distinct
that as
different
weird.
ones. But yeah, I always thought it was really cool, and then now obviously it's like, oh, because we do know like a couple dozen bands or whatever, and can like sort them into different shows that make like sense. But I always just thought that was cool. Like, got to meet a lot of different people that way.
Nice. So what got all of you into like the heavier music and stuff, and like what led you to pick up the instruments that you did?
I mean, like, my brother was he's 11 years older than me and was into new metal, so I can't remember a time where I didn't
Right.
listen to stuff like that.
I always liked heavier stuff too. My mom is just has a huge eclectic music taste. She's been a record collector since the 70s.
Nice.
And we'd always take these long road trips because my grandfather, when he got sick, refused to move up north. So we had 10 hours, and she would just give me like the CD collection, and I would pick the CD that had the prettiest like cover art on it or whatever. And a lot of times that was physical graffiti for some reason. I don't know why that appealed to like 7-year-old me, but yeah. So that's kind of was like my introduction to like heavier, louder music.
Cool.
I was just an emo kid.
I feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also just like an emo kid, and then when I got bored of that, I was like, cool, I'm just gonna shave my head and only listen to the Germs for a year.
I guess
I didn't know the shaved head part happened.
I guess we should talk about being emo kids, because like it's not easy, you know. What was it like for y'all being emo kids at school and stuff?
I was never emo. I was like goth light. for a while.
Yeah. I think what's wild to me that I've kind of noticed with and this is like a very very like micro division in like generations, but it's like I can't keep bringing it back to COVID, just like pre-COVID, post-COVID.
I mean, yeah, it's gonna be like that for like
Yeah,
ever.
but
Yeah.
now that it's just like it's really cool to me that I see a lot of like younger kids who do just dress like emo and scene and all this stuff, like go all the way in a way that I don't really remember people doing much when I was in high school, and in a way where it's like people think dressing like that or whatever is cool.
Well,
I
like,
think
it
that's
kind of
cool.
there was not like a ton, but the kids that did it like went all out. At least in my school, like the first, I'm not gonna name people, but there was like this handful of like really really on top of it scene queens that were like MySpace queens when I
Yeah.
started high school. But like by the time high school ended, that had sort of died out. So like the alt kind of stuff you would see was mostly just hippie stuff. I was like that, or not hippie, like hipster type
Yeah.
Tumblr aesthetic, like the 2014
But that's just like
Tumblr
when I
girl.
was in high school.
that's
so
kinda
that's
right,
the
but
thing.
yeah,
is, like,
you're a
you just
few
got
years younger than me,
bullied,
it just-
like-
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
yeah.
No one applauds you for it. You know,
You
you don't
dyed
really.
your hair, you just got bullied.
Let me describe an outfit and just tell me which aesthetic this is. I had a button all the way up, like paisley shirt, a cowboy bolo tie that was like a cow skull, an ankle-length velvet skirt, and combat boots.
Weird. That's just weird. That's
yeah.
that's
That was
weird.
like my favorite outfit for
But
a
that's
while in high
cool.
school.
Yeah.
It's kind of unique.
Abigail.
It's kind of like Abigail core.
It was like psychedelic cowboy goth.
But I think that's also kind of the cool thing that I've noticed with going to shows and stuff is that, like, obviously it was like that before, but especially now, it's very cool to me how everybody has a very different look and stuff. And that's not really a thing of being like, oh, you don't look right, don't come here. Like, it's because everybody did, it feels very authentically DIY in this way. Like, because people were having shows in basements or whatever before, like, you know, like, the sidebar still isn't having shows. Like, so that filled the gap. And obviously, they're not just gonna like. We were getting cliquey at these shows because nobody knew each other. It was awesome.
Right. Yeah, no. So like I know a lot of people hit their emo phase in like high school. I was like, I shit you not, in elementary school emo.
Yes,
Like
ahead of your time.
yeah, like third, fourth grade, and like yeah, no one fucked with me at all. Yeah, I got a bunch of shit for
Plus,
like
nobody else had interests at that age.
yeah, no, I was ahead of my age for sure on that. But my brother, like
I
you
wanted
said,
to be like my brother, so I did the same thing.
yeah, he's 10 years older than me.
It wasn't like emo based. It was very mall goth based, and my mother, very Catholic, pretty strict. But my godmother would every year for my birthday get me the types of clothes I wanted, and my mom would get upset, but she wouldn't take them from me. So that was
That's
my
nice.
that was my outlet.
Well, like my brother, he was listening to Askin' Alexandria in his car, and I grew up listening to Metallica and rock and shit like that. So I was like blown away, and I started looking into more bands, and then I guess you just come across the emo algorithm and whatnot. So I was like, oh, this is cool. This is how they dress and whatnot. I like this. You know what I mean? So I wear like colored skinny jeans and band T-shirts and like all the bracelets and shit, long hair. I even like painted my nails at school one time, and
I was
yeah.
like too pretentious to be part of a scene because what got me into punk was like I liked like 70s OG punk because like I bring it back to my mom, that's what she was into, and she would like very much like get excited if I was listening to the Clash or whatever. So I definitely would have been like the kid when I was 14 who's like, oh, this isn't real punk. I'm sorry, this is the Stranglers circa 1976.
But yeah, no, I mean, just like the way you dressed and stuff, that's like how my first band, how XOPOs ended up starting, was just because it was like, oh, we were the only kids at our high school that wore like, you know, like Misfits t-shirts or whatever. So it was like, oh, cool, we should be friends. We should do something about this. We should start a band.
We should do something.
Yeah.
That's kind of threatening.
Yeah.
We
it's
all
like,
have one Misfits T-shirt. We need to handle this.
yeah. It was like, huh, this is really cool. Like, we just walk past each other and be like, nice shirt for like weeks on end. And it's like, no, actually, we should like talk to each other because it sounds like we have more in common than we do with like other people here. So that was cool because that was just it happened very organically.
Well, that's how good friendships start. Like, pretty much my best friend. We met in middle school, like 6th grade. I was playing Avenged Sevenfold on my iPod, and he just saw that I was listening to it. He's like, dude, you listen to Avenged Sevenfold too? I'm like, yeah. And then, yeah, best friends.
Yeah, and it's funny what it was then, because it's like, yeah, like you said, like, yeah, you have one Misfits shirt, and it's literally like, oh, he looks so cool, he has a Dead Kennedy shirt, but like...
No, but that is how it is. You're
yeah,
right.
especially around here, yeah.
That's how two dudes in Anthem for Slaughter became friends. They were wearing, like, the same Metallica t-shirt, and they were just like...
No, that was like the signal head. Like, because if you were like me and you weren't allowed to dye your hair and do all that shit in like the Scene Kid era, you would just go to school and like look around for the other kid who also has that Asking Alexandria shirt or that accursed blood on the dance floor shirt. And they'd just be like, oh, they're like me, and you would just become friends with them. That was the only way to do it.
We
that the
embrace
worst?
the cringe. We embrace the cringe.
Is that the worst period in the emo phase, the blood on the dance floor?
Well, technically that would be like a scene thing, but they all overlapped. I think Blood on the Dance Floor is worse because of what they did, but like musically, I would
Yeah.
actually argue that they're better than a lot of that crunkcore stuff. There's this one crunkcore artist called Crazy Crazy Awesome Awesome, and they were Christian crunkcore and like
Interesting.
self-produced. They dropped out of high
That
school.
sounds like a bit.
It's
amazing.
not. They took down my favorite video. Oh, it was so fucking good. I found it on the Wayback Machine, but it's like split screen. But the one dude in it went on to, there was like a later YouTube emo channel with a group that I was too old for when it happened. I can't remember what it's called right now. There was like a group of emo kids on one channel, and he was a part of that. So I guess he did something. I don't know what happened to the woman in it.
We were just at a show. We were just at the Bleeders birthday show. Bleeders is like our favorite band because there's not a lot of other feminist hardcore bands out there. If you know any personally, let us know to the listeners at home. But we went to their birthday show, and they played, but the openers were both like hyper pop, and we were like, this is so wild. And we were like, because especially some of the hyper pops that they were playing, it like has house music in between the show, like the sets. We were like, wow, there's really no difference between like the crunkcore stuff and this hyper pop stuff now. Like,
No, yeah, the first artist kept playing songs that made me think of Cyril.
but it was just really funny. Like, I don't know, and I really enjoyed that show because I was like, oh, cool, I get to see a band that we deeply love and stuff that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, but I ended up really enjoying it.
Yeah, the one dude came from New York.
Yeah.
It's called Baggy or something.
Yeah.
I think.
I try not to get like too specific into all the subgenres because it's like the same thing with like death metal, deathcore, metalcore. It's like it's all kind of similar sounding,
Yeah.
you know. So people get all caught up on the names and stuff,
Yeah.
you know.
No, I mean, today I was thinking about how funny it is, especially in hardcore, how like men will write off like literally any band that has a woman. Like people will just say like, "Oh, I don't like women bands" or whatever, and that's a common thing to say. And you can say, "Oh, I don't like women bands," and you write off like half of, not half, unfortunately not half. You're writing off half of like who the audience would be, but unfortunately not half of bands are women because women aren't encouraged to make music like that. But like these are the same type of dudes who will be like, "Oh, well, actually, this band is mathcore, not like alternative." Like,
Mathcore.
Well, that was the thing like, in high school and stuff where dudes would always, like, if they liked a female musician, they'd have to be like, well, it's just because she's hot, or I'm not gay, I just like the song. Like,
Yeah.
dudes get really fucking weird about, like, no, it's just, you can listen to the band, it's fine, dude.
yeah, and then it just gets into a grown-up version, and that's always confused me when like, yeah, when guys say like, "Oh, I don't really like women artists." I
Oh,
really
they
like
can't say that
women
out loud
singers."
now. Well,
No,
Oh,
but they
but
do.
they do.
Some of them make.
No, I mean,
Facebook
like, when, like,
posts.
I saw someone say that, and I was kind of like, I
Yeah,
was like,
we know.
"Okay."
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where it's like it's just insane to me because I've never heard a woman have the privilege of saying, "Oh, I don't like male."
That's not
bands."
something you can do because it's really extremely hard to find bands with no men. Like, it just doesn't happen.
I've pretty much always been in the opposite boat. Like if I see like a female vocalist screaming her ass off, I've been like I think it's that much more impressive because you don't see it all that often, you know.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me the amount of people who come and see us now that we had an all-woman lineup, and they're like, "I have never seen another band with all women." I'm like, "That's crazy. How have you not?" And then I think back, and I'm like,
Have
"Yeah,
I?
no, have
Yeah.
I?" Like,
No, I mean it's definitely a good thing, and we can kind of start getting into the more topics and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
want to talk about how Scum got the name. I was trying to just research the band in general and like see what I could find online. So when I typed in the acronym Society for Cutting Up Misogynists, I came across the Scum Manifesto by
Yeah.
Valerie. How do you say her last?
Solanas.
Solanas, yeah. So just kind of, is that where you got the
Yeah.
name from?
I wanted it to be misogynist, not men, because I brought a zine with me actually. I kind of like explained that I don't know where the fuck I put it.
It's in our hearts. I
It's
guess.
okay. It doesn't need to be read right now, but because I wasn't sure if you were actually interested in that, but I did detail all of that in there because I figured people would eventually like catch on to that.
the viewers at home.
The cover's all fucked up. It's misprinted.
That's fine.
But it does have Garfield. Anyway, yeah, it's named after that because I find that book utterly fascinating, but I also didn't want people to think that it's like that I'd necessarily take it literally. I have a lot of thoughts on it, a lot of fun analytical thoughts on that book, but I don't take it literally. It's not meant to be like that.
I gotcha. So kind of talk about that manifesto a little bit for the people listening and
Also,
what it's
like,
about.
Interjection, but it's very funny because dudes are always like, "Ooh, it's just a parody." It's just like whenever they say something awful, they'll be like, "Oh, it's satire." But then if you actual fucking satire and put in front of them, they lose their shit.
Yeah.
Jumping back for a second.
Sorry.
What was I saying?
Scum
Explaining
Manifesto.
what it is.
Oh, it's this book. Okay, Valerie Solanas was this allegedly schizophrenic lady who I think she was a lesbian too. She had like an insanely fucked up, horrible life. And she the thing that she got famous for is she got in good with Andy Warhol for a little bit. She wrote this play called Up Your Ass. I have read it. It took a long time to find a copy of it, but I have read it. It's insane and vulgar.
It's really funny.
It is really, yeah, but it's like a lot,
so
even
funny.
by today's standards. She wrote it in like the 1960s, because Andy Warhol would make these like little films, art films back in the day. So she gave it to him to try to get him to do it. That's actually my favorite fun fact about her is that it was so vulgar that he thought that she was like a Fed trying to get some dirt on him, and he confronted her about it and was like, "I think you're a cop," and she apparently dropped her pants and pointed to her cunt and was like, "Yeah, this is my badge," which goes really hard.
Yeah, it kind of does.
But anyways, yeah, she went a little crazy, and I mean, he like fucked with her a lot and did a whole
Wasn't there
bunch.
a money thing too?
There's a lot. He
Yeah.
was super misogynistic, obviously, and he was kind of like what it was for her. I think is just that he was like the icing on the top of like this like experience where she had nothing but trauma from men her entire life, like insane sexual abuse, like incest, like all of it, up to that where she just kind of like lost it, and she was like even the ones that seemed like they could be kind of cool or bad, so she shot him.
The so-called progressive artist was still
Yeah. A real piece of shit. Which also is insane that he's considered such because he's literally like has insane horrible quotes too. Like he's just a capitalist.
Well, it's
But,
like every counterculture guy.
Yeah.
From the era especially. Just like
Yeah.
anything that beats. You know, all the stuff that we're supposed to read to be cultured.
But she got really mad, wrote this insane manifesto that, like I said, I have a lot of analytical thoughts on, but it's kind of all over the place and like over
Right.
the top. And then
Yes.
she shot the dude.
I gotcha. So the one of the things that like stuck out to me was something along the lines of like eliminating the male species. Is that where you start to have analytical thoughts?
That is like in the first paragraph, so I would say that's probably where I start to have analytical thoughts.
And then continue. And then keep going.
And eliminate the money system, right?
Yeah, I have it memorized, but I don't want to flex that right now.
So is there a lot of anti-capitalist stuff too with getting rid of the money system?
That's what she's saying. She calls it the money work system.
Okay.
But it's like, the thing is about it is that it's written in a really weird way, and I think it's because she's schizophrenic that it toggles back and forth, but the way that I feel about it is largely that she is kind of sometimes directly, and will tell you, but she parodies a lot of things that have more or less already been said about women by men throughout a lot of human history, but then rather than coming to the conclusions of subservience, goes to, well, we don't even need them, is like her whole thing. But I don't feel like it's meant to be taken literally like that because of all the parody in it. Plus, like, she just cracks jokes throughout the whole thing and
It's
makes shit up.
hilarious.
It is so
Well,
funny.
that's what I was talking about with like the thing where guys are always telling us to like take a joke, but like
But
when
that's-
they can't take a
That's
fucking
how
joke.
it's written. Like, the first time I read it, I was just shocked and appalled, and then like I kept thinking about it, and then I've read this book like through so many times, and I'm like, okay, I think I get it now.
Every time
But-
you get a different look.
Every time I get a different spin on it, but it's like everywhere. Like, it's, I don't know, the like list of men she says need to go. Some of them I think she's being serious, like rapists or like cops.
Right.
But some of them she's like a flim flam artist, men who produce music. Like, she's making shit up and just like throwing other stuff in there for the sake of being absurd.
Because I think also around, I'm sorry, I don't remember when it was written. Do
No,
you-
1968, I think.
Okay, 1968. That's perfect. It's important. Like, reading it today was that I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of people were all writing these kinds of things and being like, "This is how the world could work without money," in a very realistic way. And a lot of people were just like, truly believed that if everybody did acid, we'd have a utopia. So that's the thing is, like, to us, it's like, oh, this is insane that she wrote all this. But that wasn't insane, and the most frustrating thing to women of that time, especially in like student political organizing, because a lot of the feminist movement grew out of civil rights and stuff, were everybody coming together for civil rights, and women still being treated like shit in these all these student organizations. So you're hearing all these people, whether it's like civil rights or like kind of like the acid era of like this like coming up with a utopian post-capitalist like free love, it's in no place did everybody was offering these radical alternatives to society, but even the radical alternatives still treated women like shit. Like, you had to center that. Like,
Well, that was like where like, because that happened, and then right after that, like that next wave of feminists kind of kicked up, and it was like very, very like radically leftist because it did come from those was it Shulamith Firestone who was like really active, and I think it was like her student like communist organization, because that was like also, just the thing of the time, because she had done a lot of stuff in the civil rights movement, but she had noted like. She said that she would go to, I think it was her, but
Yeah.
you can correct me if I'm wrong. She would go to like all these like Marxist organizational meetings, and it would be like all these men talking around and the women just like waiting on them, like filling their coffee cups, doing all that kinds of shit. And she noticed it, and she went up on stage at one of these like, not stage, but like they had like
podium.
these like little
talking,
rally
yeah.
things where like, so first people would get up like piece by piece, and there was this one point where she had like noticed all this, and she had basically said, the gist of it was like, clearly things aren't equal. All the women are doing this. Like, I think just started preaching, like, very foundational women's liberation from, like, all stuff that, like, she had just come up with from what she had observed. And, like, a crowd, like, a chant, like, started echoing through where they just demanded that she take her off and fuck her was the thing. They said that
Oh.
she needed to be removed from,
Whoa.
I think it was a stage, because they
Jesus
just had it like
Christ.
a student auditorium thing. They're like, take her off and fuck her. And so she was removed from the stage. So, like,
Jeez.
men were really, and still not, although I think they just kind of pretend to be a little bit more now. But, like, yeah, men,
Well,
and
that's such a common thing. Like, dudes on Twitter, like,
well, that's,
especially with Greta Thunberg.
yeah.
Like, that's specifically her. Just like dudes who are mad at her and don't want to hear what she has to say about the environment are just like this really sexualized hatred of her.
That's
Yeah.
a common thing, but I also, the thing is, like, these are circles that are allegedly progressive, being so blunt back in the day, and it was more common. I don't think that went away. I think it changed form. I think that now, no man wants to be seen as, like, sexist or, like, as though they're, like, have the same kind of thoughts or ideas, so they find special little ways to dance around it, and then use buzzwords and whatnot, you
and I
know?
think that's also like connecting the counterculture of that being like a more like of the 60s. Is that's obviously politically driven in ways that punk music is, but hardcore music isn't. So that's the thing, is like, I don't know, people do come together to make these kind of more like utopian societies for, like, you know, how music scenes work or whatever, and then still again in these it's like, you know, never woman centered, and like a lot of times usually like woman hostile, like just like so I don't think that there's a lot of difference between that, because that's still both kind of like, I'd say, like youth subcultures, just one more politically driven and hardcore being like apolitical almost to a fault.
That's true. That's why, like, I feel like in, like, the more general punk subculture stuff, like I see a lot more of that, like, at least claiming to respect women, and they're not necessarily acting on it, versus going on Facebook and being like, I hate women in I hate women in hardcore. They just get men's dicks hard.
And I think it's hard because I've also had situations in my own life where you become like, there's never space to be a woman who is respected. Either you're like a woman or you're like one of the boys. And then people sharing these like vulgar jokes with me or whatever, it's like, was I supposed to laugh at that? Did you think I'd find that funny? But they just think like, oh, well, you're cool, you're one of the guys, so you'll get it, like, it's fine. And not being able to like both see you as someone that you respect and like who has a space in the scene, and also like, obviously I don't believe that like,
Well, it's like
I don't know.
they want to view you as one of the guys, or they want to view you as a woman, and then therefore disrespect you.
Well, what you admit with that too is that it's like they see women as not full humans.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I think that a lot of people, like, because they're like, well, yeah, of course you're human. Like, they don't admit or they don't quite understand when women are like, we're objectified, we're, you know, we're not seen as like whole complete people, we're like second rate or whatever. They're like, no, but of course we do, because you're literally a person in front of me. But unless they can register you as like basically man light, they don't see you at like literally that.
Yeah.
You become one of the boys. You have to be one of the boys and fit in that way, or else you are something else.
Or
You know.
what you said with guys being like, oh, I love female bands, like female fronted bands, like I love Paramore. Hayley Williams is so hot.
Yeah, because I feel like they have to have an excuse.
Well, not to have an excuse, but like, I mean, it's just that it's, you get into like the fetishization of it, like the big titty goth girlfriend meme destroyed a generation of young men. Just
It's
where again,
true.
it's just, that was crazy, because like you could even take as a woman like presenting yourself in a different way, like, you know, how you choose to dress, how you choose to do your hair or whatever, and then this like mass movement to just lump it all into like, oh, well, here's just this really like, I don't know, pornified idea of, now we're gonna say like, oh, these goth girls are crazy. Like, you can't win. There's no subculture where
I
you
used
can
to
win.
dress in trad goth every day, and there's a whole other thing I could get to feminist-wise with that. But I have to say, I experienced the shift from bullied and harassed constantly to object of extreme fetishization everywhere I go. There was no in between. There's no point where I felt like a person. Like,
Damn.
Well, that's like I stopped wearing chokers for a while because like when I worked at a coffee shop, there was like this dude who'd be kind of weird. Like he thought that. And I'm not even talking like it wasn't like a
like
collar.
a little tattoo choker.
Yeah, it was like a little tattoo
Yeah.
choker or like a little ribbon one, and like dudes would like sexualize that, and like. Yeah, and I was like, no, it's a choker. I wear it because like I like to wear necklaces that don't get into my like
Yeah.
you know,
Your
don't get in
food
the way.
service?
Yeah, exactly.
Like-
Yeah, so I stopped wearing chokers because dudes will like fetishize anything and then be weird about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that shit's fucking sad, honestly. It's like, why you gotta be fucking weird about it, dude?
Just be normal about it. I think
Yeah,
it's
wha-
so easy to just be normal about
Yeah, what's
things.
wrong with just being like, I like a choker, like,
Yeah.
and leave it at that? And it's I said sad because it's like y'all are talking about like shit that you were doing that you liked that you had to change because
Well,
of
I didn't
male
have
behavior.
to change it because of that, but also, yeah, like I said, there's a whole other thing I could get into with that.
Feel free. That's why I'm at. If you don't want to.
That might take a little while.
Yeah, keep
Maybe.
going on those questions.
Okay, well, I mean, basically next, I just wanted to get into some of like the other feminist icons. I noticed in the link tree on your Instagram, you have a bunch of free PDFs for
Mhm.
feminist literature. So I want to go through like each of the people that you had on there. Just kind of say why you chose those specific literatures and like what these females mean to the movement and stuff like that.
Knowledge is power.
Sisterhood
And
is
I guess what they
powerful.
mean to you individually. So the first one was Andrea Dworkin.
Yeah, she's also the interlude sample on her album is her giving
Perfect.
a speech. So
And
yeah,
Got
also,
it.
if you see us in person,
yeah,
all of our sets open with
yeah. We usually open with a
monologue
different
of
thing
her.
from
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Okay.
We quite like her. She is a Jewish lesbian feminist who was mostly active in the 70s and 80s, I would say. Who I don't know. She wrote a lot of theory and did a lot of activism, and I tend to like a lot of her stuff. Largely because though there's some on there who like that I know you'll point out who write in very academic tones and stuff. She was not a woman who like was born of academia. She just like experienced. She used to be in the sex trade, and she had a marriage to a man before, even though she's a lesbian. She just hadn't figured it out, I suppose. Obviously that ended, where she just like had a lot of experiences and noticed a lot of things and started writing it down. Her first book, Woman Hating, which I think is one of the PDFs I included, opens up with like basically like, this isn't going to be some like academic flowery bullshit dribble, like I'm just writing about what I've observed, and it goes pretty hard. And I think that because of that, it's also really easy for people to start there and grasp, even basic concepts that she's trying to put down because it's relatable. It's not coming from someone trying to like make an academic point.
Yeah, I think that's nice no matter what you're reading. It's kind of like when someone's being like trying to be motivational, sometimes it comes off as corny or like
Yeah.
superficial.
Well, yeah, it's not someone's PhD thesis.
Yeah. No, it's definitely especially with the literature and stuff. I was a women's studies major, so I went to school to read these. Kayla read them for fun. So that was when we really realized that like, oh shit, we have a lot in common because we both like kind of would reference just like things that you had to like know the theory to know. And that's the thing that I always liked about being a women's studies major too, was that all my professor stuff were always like, this stuff is online. If you want to read any of it, it's online. And that's really important because I think with a lot of other things, or just like in today's age, people are like, oh, well, theory's too hard to read, it's too inaccessible. And thankfully, like, feminist theory always worked to actively be against that, to like, these books you can find online, a lot of them are not written in academic jargon, and people want to discuss them, like, people want to, if you have a question, people want to answer. Like, I think that's the part that's best about it.
Yeah.
I noticed when I first was kind of looking into the band and looking into her, I noticed she had like whole speeches and like lectures and stuff about like pornography and stuff like that. What other kind of like what topics did she talk about?
I mean, like I said, I mentioned she was in the sex trade. She really, I don't even know how to like put it. She covered a little bit of everything. A lot of it was like analysis on data in the earlier books, and then you get to ones like Intercourse, which are just like analyses of like literature and stuff. So it's but I mean, everything from what we would today probably refer to as rape culture to what we would today refer to as femicide. She usually called it gynocide because it was, fresh. She was,
Inventing
It
the
was
terminology
foundational,
as she's
yeah.
going, yeah.
But like a lot of pornography and sex trade stuff based on experience and observation, and the fact that like a lot of people hadn't talked about it at that point, but there was like an affect that was coming about in that era, right? I mean, like I said, she talks about it in a lot of these books, but like, like right after that like free love movement, people like Hugh Hefner and the hustler dude that I can't think of his name right now, kind of got on it, corporatized it, and then a whole bunch of shit came out of that had
yeah.
effects. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
like,
I think
not
that's-
so surprisingly, dude's a creepy fuck.
Yeah. So just like the effects that it had on the culture, and of course, most importantly, the women who were affected by it, both in the industry and outside of the industry, from like men who were like in these circles, like all kinds of stuff like that. So that was a big focus of her time because no one else had noted it.
Yeah.
And one of our biggest things about like playing the sample of her at the beginning of our sets and stuff is because it's cool when people really like it, but we like it more when we're at shows where it's like, oh, these dudes wouldn't hear this otherwise. Like, they wouldn't be reading this otherwise. So we like being able to force people into it. If you're gonna force someone to do something, force them to listen to Andrew Dorkin talk. But that is I can't remember what exact song it's from, but Bikini Kill, there's one where they're reading where they're talking about how Bikini Kill was getting criticized as they're not musicians, they're activists.
Oh, that's for
Thurston Hearts the Who. They're reading a negative review where they're saying like, oh, they're not even musicians, they can't play this music good, they're just activists, and then like when we always say that's kind of something that we want to embrace with the band is like,
activists, not musicians.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
obviously.
I mean, she didn't know how to play guitar. She figured out how to play drums for this, and she had done bass for like a jazz thing in the past.
Yeah.
I think you'd be surprised how often that is in bands.
Yeah.
though.
Right,
Like,
but
I'm starting to talk to more and
the
figure out how they
motivating
form.
factor for us, at least, is the feminism. I'm assuming so for her as well.
Yeah.
She is newer. We haven't talked about it a ton, and
Yeah.
Mac is just happy to be involved. She wants to play drums.
Well, yeah, and that's like I really love being in a band with other women because like I played like with friends and stuff in high school, and then I kind of got out of it in college. But it's just such better energy because usually women like we get into it later.
Yeah.
So like I would feel really self-conscious playing with men who would also be like very oriented around shredding. And have you listened to this? Have you listened to that? Like all the hierarchical bullshit. So it's really cool just to be like, hey, I can kind of play bass. And then you guys were like, cool.
And exactly for this type of music, it's just the type of music we like. It's pretty easy to play. So that was a very big thing that I didn't feel like uncomfortable necessarily going into it. Just be like, well, I'll figure it out. But that the important part is just that we felt strongly about it. And that this was a band that like I would have loved to fit into when I was in like high school and stuff. I would have loved to listen to
I mean,
stuff.
aside from the fact that I feel like the world needs quite a bit of feminism right now, like just these scenes needed something. Like there was just an era shortly before COVID where like there was one venue, I don't know if I want to name it right now, but there's one like DIY venue that I would go to where there had never been a show until right after COVID where I wasn't sexually harassed or assaulted. Just one.
Damn.
So after COVID. Before that, there was none. So it was like.
And I think I also like being in a band before where I was the only woman in that band when I was in high school. The amount of times we play shows, it's just like no other women on stage the whole night. There'd be 4 or 5 bands playing, and they'd be like, "Oh, this is cool. This is like a girl band." It's like, okay, there's one girl in this. Like this band is 1/4 girl,
Right.
and still they'd be like, "Oh yeah, there's a girl band in this bill," and it's like, how is that out of like the 16, 20 other people on stage tonight? Is there not one other? But I mean, it was just the genre of music. But yeah, we do like being able to invade these spaces because we're like, okay, listen to Dorkin. Okay, now we'll throw you a fat riff. Like,
Well, yeah, so I remember when I was like a teenager and I was like getting into punk and stuff that if I looked up like women punk bands, like so many of the results, like 80% would be a band that had like a woman vocalist.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that hits different though. It's a different dynamic to have like women playing everything, or at least most of the things.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
From the ground up.
No, I like that you kind of force them to listen because some people like just outside of feminism, like politically and whatnot, like they only listen to what the left has to say or to what the right has to say, and sometimes you just kind of have to be forced to listen to some other opinions,
Yeah.
and I think it kind of opens people up, and like honestly, because like I said, I listened to some of her like discussions on pornography and stuff like that. I feel like they should be showing that to like younger boys and shit like that at school, if they heard that shit, it might help prevent, because I feel like that's a huge problem.
It's a huge
you know?
problem, and you
Yeah.
never hear an alternate view that's like sort of like the dichotomy you see
Well,
is
it's-
like if you're liberal or leftist, you're pro porn, and if you're anti, it means you're like Christian conservative hater.
There's no nuance in understanding that there's different views on it,
Yeah.
different necessary views, and I think that's on purpose.
Yeah,
That's definitely on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean that's the thing is it's like you can be anti-porn. It's not that we're anti-sex worker, but like being anti-pornography is important because we know too much about the industry now. Like everybody knows too much about the industry now.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's other people started to notice too,
Yeah.
but for a long time it was just like before I started researching it and also discovering like, oh, this was a regular tenet of leftism like prior to 10 years ago. But before I had started researching that, like, I was in like my communities where a lot of people that I just knew, a lot of the women I knew were like in the sex trade, either doing porn or OnlyFans or more. And the amount of trauma that would just get unloaded, but like as a cope, was really, really sad.
But
And
still
now
having to be like, well, it's not sex work's fault, but
Well,
it's like
right.
then whose fault is it? Like yours?
Right,
It's
well,
not.
that's, like,
Like-
I just it came a point, and I think part of it is like me being older now too, because like I understand the defensiveness when you're younger, because it does seem like if you're critical of this industry, you're doing it in a right wing way, because like there's so many men who are just like, well, you're basically a whore, and you should die for that, sinner. Rather, but like it's just weird how there was such a glaringly, very very clearly, I'm a leftist. I'm pretty loud about that, but like I wasn't exposed to like any other viewpoints for a long time, even within like leftist circles, because I guess I just stayed in these echo chambers. But so were my friends who were being hurt, and now most of them have, found ways out and are talking about all the negative after effects of it and stuff. And I think that's part of why I want to talk to it, because it's like, I'm a few years older. I'm 25 this year. Then a lot of these younger people in the scene are in these like general leftist spaces who are clearly like in the same type of like little weird niche echo chambers that I was. And it scares me. And so I want to talk about that, because like if I can help even like one person not get that trauma, then like I think, that's a good thing, right?
Of course.
And it's even more evil nowadays. I don't know, especially with like TikTok and stuff. I had to delete that app very early on because I don't like how the algorithm just
The
feeds you
algorithm,
things that you don't want.
if
But
you say
the
you're a
amount of
female,
things-
immediately, it doesn't matter what age, you're bombarded with plastic surgery ads, and this is how much money I made as a stripper.
yes, that's the
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
the big
Immediately.
thing. The big things that were like, get ready with me, like day in the life of a stripper, sex worker, whatever, and like the comments are full of teenage girls saying like, I can't wait to turn 18. And especially with that stuff, it's really like the glamorization of it in the same way that like Playboy did in like the 90s and 2000s and stuff, where they only show you, and even then now we know more about what's going on in the Playboy mansion and stuff. And
I want to.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I forgot what I said. I said he was a weird fuck. I want to take that back. He was a twisted fuck.
Yeah.
I started to remember like some of the wild shit that I read, and I was like,
I remember when he
Whoa.
died.
Genuinely evil man.
I remember when he died too. People were posting like really out of context, vaguely progressive things, and just being like, "Yeah, feminist Hugh Hefner."
That happens with a
Yes.
lot of. That's what I'm talking about. Like with my like weird little echo chambers of these people. I tend to call like the groups I was in like rad lib nowadays. It's like people who think they're leftist but they're internet leftist, so they've only been fed this very specific narrative that is more radical than liberalism, but it's still liberalism at
Well,
its
people,
core.
it's people who think that leftism is extreme Democrat.
No, that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just I was like that for a long time. But that's exactly what happens in these circles is you are fed only it's cherry picked everything, and you don't realize it because you're on social media constantly and you're
Right.
seeing it from everywhere constantly. So it just kind of gets into your head like
And I
that is
think
the
it's more
reality of it.
harmful that it's coming from social media. It's coming from an organic place as opposed to like I said with like Playboy and stuff. Like they had the reality TV show and stuff. So girls would be like, I want to be like them one day. But, you know, even if you're, like, an adult or whatever, you get to think, like, well, that's just what they're showing on TV. Now that you get to see this stuff on TikTok and
Fake
stuff,
authenticity.
yeah, it's the idea of, like, oh, well, if this is a real person, then clearly this is a good thing or whatever. And it's hard it just got too depressing. Like, if I was just, like, trying to smoke weed and chill at home and, like, watch TikTok, literally, then, like, the TikToks it would be showing me would be, like, yeah, I'd go into the comments and be girls like, I can't wait to turn 18. I want a sugar daddy so bad. I'm like, this is fucking evil. This is like, I had to delete it off my phone because I would just get too upset.
And like, I think it's also important to like communicate with younger people because, for like example, late in high school, like there's lots of talk about rape culture and like that you should have like an affirmative, enthusiastic yes. But the same people who said you should have an enthusiastic yes and you should know that she wants it, those are the same people who think that prostitution's completely okay, even though it's like wait, so
Consent can be purchased? You
Right.
can't work to convince them in other ways, but if you convince them with money, it's entirely okay.
You shouldn't be negotiating on consent. is
That's
kinda what you're
exactly
saying.
the point.
and it was just like this thing where I was like, I had that in my head. I'm like,
that's
wait.
where all the like not all, but a lot of the trauma in the women that I've known who have been in the sex industry comes from is that like they just went several years thinking this is my free choice, even though they were having sex with people that they wouldn't otherwise do it because they paid them. They were coerced with money because they needed to make rent.
And especially,
That's like the whole issue. So it's like, I think that somewhere the dichotomy and like understanding where like sex workers are harmed got twisted into sex work is good. And it's something that's strange because we don't do that with any other industry. When we talk about the exploitation and hardships that Amazon workers like face, we're not like,
Right.
let's buy more Amazon
That's what
products
I was
about
saying,
it.
Everybody who has these safe views are also the people who are like staunchly like union and like, oh yeah, we should totally have unions. Like, if you could acknowledge that workers' rights get demolished in like a Starbucks, that's not a place where you're alone with a man who could have a weapon,
Yeah.
you know, having to exchange bodily fluids for money so that you can make your rent. And that's the thing that I don't understand.
Well,
is
the
like,
popular
yeah.
view too is like it's sort of the thing now is like saying, well, yeah, it's exploitative, but it's not any more exploitative than XYZ job.
And
what
being a hostess at Applebee's.
Yeah,
It's
and
like,
what I say to
dude.
that is like, okay, if like sexual exploitation isn't worse than other sort of job exploitation, then why is it we consider sexual violence a different category from regular violence? I mean,
Yeah.
why is sexual assault? Wouldn't that just be a subcategory of physical assault?
Well, that's
But
the
we
thing
know
is-
there's a difference. We know there's
Well,
a
that's
difference.
what I'm talking about. There's like once or twice that people had like sort of argued this against me when I was sort of like younger and more insane and very much in my like social media bubble, where I was like, I couldn't compute that as rhetoric that like was in itself like coming from like, you know, my side essentially. It makes perfect sense, but like I just wasn't willing to accept it, and I think that that is scary. It wasn't even something like I realized it was like a few years ago now. There was this episode of like Rev Left Radio, which I don't listen to often, but I listened to this episode, and there were two people on there, and they had both been in the sex trade. And
Is this the Affirm people?
yeah, although they just left Affirm.
No, I heard
Esperanza
about
just
that.
yeah
That's
okay.
the whole thing.
Esperanza was a trans woman who was in the sex trade talking about it on that podcast, and it was just like this one wording that she had where it was like, people don't realize it. She's like, the people that they like put on a pedestal are like those who are doing it as a side hustle, really. Because that's the only way it can ever truly be a choice. She's like, you know, like I knew women who thought that they loved it all the time, but the matter of fact is like even if you're cozy in it, like as soon as rent's due and like maybe you missed out on something happened, like, you know, your car got fucked up and you need, like as soon as that happens, it is no longer on the same level. Like it's no longer normal consensual. You no longer have the ability to turn it down. Because she was talking about like people who like, you know, like plenty of them can turn it down and stuff. It's like there's, unless it is something that is on the side and you are already privileged enough to like have it be on the side just for extra cash, you can't turn it down. And if the only people that like are truly not being exploited are the ones that don't need it, why are we
it's like
defending it?
No other industry we do that. It's like
Exactly.
It's sort of like if we made the face of farm workers instead of like Latinos being exploited and like poisoned with pesticides out in California. It's like if we made the face of farm workers like my dad growing tomatoes.
Yeah.
We don't do that for any other industry, but as soon
Right.
as it's an industry that is exploiting women primarily, I mean, all this and that all goes out the window.
But that's what I'm saying, though. Going way back to, like, how I'm, like, I think that same vitriol, like, you know, how, like, they were like, take her off and fuck her. That same vitriol exists today in these leftist circles with men. They still hate women just as much, but they have found a special way to be like, okay, but I hate them in a far more progressive way than you ever could. You know?
Actually,
Yeah.
women in a really
Actually,
woke, liberal way.
You, the traumatized women, are the real haters of women because,
They always
you
say,
know,
you
like,
want to take away women's agency, and I'm like,
that's
no.
exactly no.
It's like, no, I'm analyzing this like we analyze any other fucking class.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, like, and they'll say that to, like, women who have experienced it firsthand.
Yeah.
It's insane. But that's a good example of what I'm
Well,
talking
what
about.
I've started doing is I flip it back. Is you'll notice because they're never comfortable talking about the men who do the harming. They always say, "Oh, you want to take away women's agency? You're judging women." I'll be like, "Okay, are we going to talk about why men want to have sex with women who don't want to have sex with them? Are we going to talk about like why men sexualize violence?"
Yeah, no, I mean, I started doing the same thing when talking about, because
It's
I'm
always
gonna
bring it
bare my
back.
soul real quick. I used to be very much into, like, BDSM stuff at the same time that I was in, like, that, once again, social media bubble. And people act like kink shaming or whatever is like a crime against humanity because you're taking away women's agency by being critical of something. But it's like, when I'm criticizing, like, a CNC kink, I'm not
And to
judging-
clarify, that's just like a rape kink.
I'm a
Yeah.
little uneducated in the kinks. What is?
consensual non-consent. It's a rape fetish.
Oh, okay. So
People
like,
just put that shit on their Tinder bio.
It's
just
insane.
Like, by the way,
Yeah.
I'm into CNC. By the way, I'm into rape.
It's no,
Like,
I
but
insist on
like,
calling it a
okay,
rape
I know what
fetish.
you're
Yeah.
talking about now. Okay.
no, but yeah. So it's like, people will be like, okay, well, these are literally traumatized women making choices for themselves. And it's like, okay, I've been the traumatized woman. First of all, we can talk about how that's not at all a healthy coping mechanism. I've lived it. I've experienced it. It's not good. But, like, let's put that aside for a minute. Why does your boyfriend want to pretend to rape you?
right.
Why is he getting off on
yeah.
that? Why aren't we talking about that part? Why are you acting like I'm, like, killing someone for being like, maybe that's not cool?
And that's what we're saying is in hardcore leftism or whatever it is, literally, it's you only vocally support women when it's convenient to
they
your
treat
whims
it
and
like
desires.
the narrative is usually that it's some form of, like, sexual oppression, like the right are, like, purists, you know, right wingers tend to be, at least
Nobody's
in this context.
fucking pure.
Right. Well, no, not actually, but, like, the narrative is like, it's, you know, unholy, it's sinful, you can't do these things.
Right.
So then it's like, that becomes like what is associated with right wing rhetoric. So then if you're critical of something for an entirely other reason, they're like, oh, that must mean you be siding with these guys. And it's like, no. But it also makes me insane because, like, these people understand it in, like, any other context that you can almost sort of agree on the very, like, face value things. Like, there's a lot of self-proclaimed leftist dudes that are extremely pro-gun. There's, you know, that's typically a right-wing stance.
Right.
They have extremely leftist reasons for being that way. They understand perfectly well that you can, like, very technically on the surface level have like a similar belief to someone that you don't politically align with, but for entirely different political reasons, they just refuse it when it's convenient for them.
Well, it's like the
Yeah.
example I bring up is it's like, okay, rape is hierarchical violence against women. It's like akin to a hate crime. I mean, if you are not okay with someone having a kink that's like racist and racialized, then why are you okay with a misogynistic kink? And it's just because, once again, we're just so uncomfortable, even in left spaces, with viewing women as an oppressed class.
Which
Yeah.
is crazy. I also think that, like, a lot of people feel like we're just kind of, like, done with that. Like, I think that they knew that, like, feminist activism in some facet existed, like, before a lot of the others, so they're like, we did that already.
Yeah, like you can have an office job and not get sexually harassed at it. Okay, feminism has won. Like, and everyone's like,
Well,
that's
what
enough
really
of that.
happened, and I think I talked about it a little bit in there. I think what really happened is that, you know, in the early 90s, what's considered the third wave came about, and the shifted away from, like I said, in the wave prior, though it had its flaws, it was all about, like, you know, centered around, like, these radical leftist sort of ideologies. That's where it grew from, those movements. But then in the 90s, it was very liberal, and it became all about choice. So rather than being like, how does this affect women's liberation as a class, it was about women can make whatever choices they want for themselves on a very
And
individual
I think that
basis.
made sense at the time, especially in the 90s, these were a lot of women who were
I'm not saying
effectively growing up in like a post Roe v. Wade world.
yeah.
As we all did.
Also
until a
during
very,
like Reaganomics and
until
stuff,
a
so
very
everything
recent
seemed.
time.
Yeah, we'll talk about that
Yeah.
later for sure.
Yeah,
But-
so that's the biggest thing is like I feel like there was more time to be able to kind of split hairs over this stuff and be like, well, women can make these choices. There weren't, I don't want to say not important things to talk about, but right
felt
now
like
we've
the
gotten
battle's
to
been
like,
won.
yeah, like the battle had been won from legal standpoints in a couple of ways, but and I think we got a little too comfortable with that for a while because we didn't think that was going to change. So I mean, that was just kind of like 50 years of being like, oh, it's done, and I mean, there's no way that people could say that now.
Yeah, it's just, but that is
But
like
we were still raised that same world.
essentially, yeah, that's what happened though. Is that like, for whatever reason, that obviously, but like the cultural shift happened within feminist spaces where it became about the individual rather than the class, and then like everywhere is just covered in anti-feminist propaganda, like just media, everything, like it's everywhere. And until you read theory, you don't notice it,
Right.
at least to the degree that it is, right? And so like these two things kind of combine to be like nowadays feminism is just portrayed, although it has been changing lately, like a lot of times it is just portrayed as like women having choices,
Right.
even if they're not like really choices, you know.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of men, much more older men for sure, they say that like women have the right to vote, all this, like what are they still fighting for? So that's kind of, disprove that statement for me. Like what is the movement still fighting for and whatnot?
I always posit it as a liberation, but that happens in a lot of aspects. For instance, I'm bad at wording things on the spot.
It's okay.
I mean, for instance, all of the things we've talked about already.
Right.
There's so many things where it's like, there's no legal rights seemingly being infringed upon, especially like in the culture that we have where a lot of things are normalized, but these are still things that are really harmful. So, we have a culture where sexual violence is extremely normalized, but like in a way that, is excused. We have a culture where women are gate-kept out of spaces in ways that like you don't really stop and think about that often because we're just used to it. We live in a culture where like you have to think about it too in other aspects. Like women are an oppressed class, a marginalized group, and like a lot of like our progress has been actively undone. So for instance, the abortion thing, that's huge. In terms of even reproductive care, like male birth control is not even something that hardly exists, even though they've done tests, because like
Right.
tests come back with like things that are half as bad as what happens to women, but they don't,
Yeah, that was something that I was kind of. I think I just seen it like in news articles and stuff or on Facebook or something where it was obviously kind of pointing out the hypocrisy and whatnot. Because like every girlfriend I've had, like they've complained about the medications and the birth controls and stuff.
Experimental hormones.
Yeah, I mean
basically.
they I've heard like a lot of bad side effects and stuff like that.
And that's another thing that is crazy is how the medical system works. A lot of times, like prescription drugs and stuff were not tested on women equally as they were on men.
medical
like,
misogyny is a huge thing. No, it wasn't until the 90s that women were included for medical trials in the U.S.
Like at all.
so any
Yeah, at
drug
all.
before that, which we do use a lot of prescription drugs that were pre then, like those women who took it before them were just human guinea pigs.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a lot of stuff, and the biggest thing right now, obviously, is Roe v. Wade. Is I think obviously like how horrifying that was, but then also the fear that it's like literally any progress any marginalized group has made, like we've realized like, oh cool, like that could all just be taken away.
Right, we thought it was written in stone. Like,
Yeah.
after Roe v. Wade, you even had like a few fringe people in Congress, a few Republicans who were like, well, maybe states should decide if we have interracial marriage.
Yeah.
Like, it was just sort of this moment after Roe v. Wade where you're like, okay, I mean, if this can happen, anything can happen.
That's a good ass point, and honestly, that kind of makes me think like, why aren't more? Well, obviously, there's just the whole misogyny thing, but like, why aren't more fucking people on the right? Why didn't that scare more people? Because if they can do that, they could easily just go like, oh, no guns. Because if they did
Yeah.
that, they'd be
Well, that's
flipping
just the
shit.
thing is that I don't think nobody really understands until they're affected by it.
Yep.
So that's the thing is, I think if just for me, obviously that fear is just that, like, oh cool, like there's no permanency in anything that we've done, and we've lost, like we said, we've lost a lot of the knowledge of how that stuff did get done in the first place, because that was just a different time, with different resources where they worked towards it. But we've tried, that's another thing we did once, but we had like a documentary showing at the
Yeah, I have a note
garage.
about that.
Really?
I do.
But yeah, that was cool. That was a documentary that I had to watch for one of my women's studies classes that Kayla had seen, about women who learned how to perform
It
abortions.
was the Jane Collective,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
It was just a group of women who learned how to perform abortions in like a safe environment because they were tired of having to go to places where they'd extort you for money and then possibly kill you. Which I think that's just like so wild. That wasn't that long ago. This was just in, the late 60s,
No.
like early
Even
70s.
even when you go back and look at the civil rights movement, not long ago at all.
Oh yeah, like my mom, her school district desegregated when she started middle school. Like Led Zeppelin was on tour when there was still segregated school. Like, that's how I put it. Yeah, I mean it's
That's a good
crazy
way to put it. Yeah, it is definitely crazy. So I want to get more because we're covering all sorts of stuff,
Yeah.
which is perfectly fine. And we'll like start covering it again. But I wanted to talk about some of the other feminist icons that you
Yeah.
guys talked about.
Oh,
Audre
yeah.
Lorde.
Yeah, Audre Lorde. Do you want to take one?
No, you can take this one.
do it. I'm not as familiar with her.
Yeah, she was an African American poet who did a lot. I don't know. She's like a broader one that I want to. I don't remember which one I put on there. I put Sister Outsider on there. Did you take notes of the?
Honestly, I just made sure to take notes of the names and stuff like
No, that's
that.
fine. She was a black lesbian activist. Who, yeah, she did poetry. That was her biggest thing. She wrote about race and class and being gay and being a woman, especially, is what she was known for. She would give a lot of talks with her poetry, and just like her poetry is very good and very topical. It's less theory, more that.
Okay.
So obviously that's another thing that we celebrate, obviously, is the fact that it doesn't have to be theory to be something that educates and informs.
Yeah,
and
I
people
think
can
I
connect
also
with.
only
That's
put
what we
black
try
and
to do.
Jewish women on that list.
It was Sister Outsider, by the way.
Yeah. I like that one.
Yeah, because I think like a really harmful, insidious thing is just the fact that we live in such a male world. It's like, okay, you're a little girl, you're getting into art. All the artists are male, all the famous artists, all the famous authors, all the local politicians. Anyone who's like relevant or calls shots seems to be a guy.
That's a commentary in the S.C.U.M Manifesto, but
Yeah.
in a really funny way.
Well, and I think in a lot of times, like, too, where so much of, like, it was always really hard for me to understand, like, why are there so many men, and, like, especially young men and boys who have such weird takes on women or girls, like we're aliens? But it's like, why wouldn't they come out that way when we only give them the male perspective from everything, from government to art to their local community, their household? Like, I
Right.
work for the county, and I look at a lot of property records. And each property has a slot, like owner 1, owner 2. It doesn't make a difference. They're both equal owners. But I have
Right.
never seen, like in a married couple, I've never seen a woman listed as owner 1. Never.
So it's one of
In
those
the
like
thousands of property records I've looked at where it's a married heterosexual couple.
There's still a hierarchy in some way. I mean,
Yeah.
That's the default assumption.
And like I tried to explain that to someone, they're like, "Oh, but there's like not a difference between like slot 1 and slot 2." And I'm like, "No, but it's just insane to me that male defaults to
for
slot
rental
1.
stuff.
I get what you're
When I
saying.
was living with my ex-boyfriend, I listed my name first, and yet if we ever got joint mail, it was Mr. and Mrs. His last name. I'm not gonna say it, but it
Yeah.
was like, we're not married, and my name's listed first. Like, why?
and you didn't have the same last name.
No,
it just-
not even close.
That's I guess that I get what you're saying.
Diagnosed me with being the man as well, just being an accessory on
It's
the
a
side.
subconscious thing of putting the woman below the man. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I had bell hooks on here too.
Do I have to take all of them? I
Oh,
know you're a big Bell Hooks fan.
Yeah. Everybody should read All About Love. But again, another thing that she was a black woman, feminist. She's a fantastic writer, fantastic. I don't know what the word when I was like speaker, she coined a term, white heterosexual or white patriarchal capitalist class, where she analyzed a lot of stuff in, like, she just came up with a very succinct way to kind of break down the culture, and just a great writer. I'd say just All About Love is one of my favorite books because she writes about, this isn't like even necessarily explicitly feminist, but obviously it's just, it's so valuable to read stuff that isn't explicitly feminist by feminists, because it doesn't always have to be on the feminism, but like just getting that view on other things, like in that case love, like how we think of love, like how love existed as a construct is a very recent thing in history. A lot of things that we take for granted, and that again obviously mirrors a lot of the stuff that we were saying about like sexism, but how it's just great. I don't know, it's a great book, but I just could go on about it. But yeah, I think another thing we've talked about, how a lot of the series, I talk about Andrea Dworkin, but especially Bell Hooks, like a lot of her talks and stuff online, a lot of cultural criticism. She passed away very recently, like in the past year or two.
Yeah.
So there is very recent cultural criticism for her too, which is obviously interesting, and it's unfortunate that I can't think of a lot of, because she was more of kind of like the pop psychology type of thing, where like All About Love transcended being like a feminist book or whatever. We don't have a lot of feminist public intellectuals like that anymore, which is a shame.
Yeah.
So you would say that's like a revolving problem, is that there's not more outspoken, or I guess more big feminists.
And I think one of the things is that like we said, these are people who all came from a very specific time, and again, once we had all these women or whatever, it's like okay, well, you guys get 10 women who get to speak for all of you, and then they eventually like pass away because they were all famous in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then it's like there's no replacement rate. Like we're just running out of these great voices, and that's upsetting. But yeah, that's definitely how I feel about it.
I gotcha. I might say this wrong. Shulamith Firestone?
Yes. Firestone. That was the one who I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
She's the one that we like first talked about together, because she wrote The Dialectic of Sex, which, I mean, I should also say that a lot of these are like dated in their own respects too, which is going to happen because they're like half a century old.
Historical context and nuance is all we ask.
Yeah. She's another Jewish woman. I think she was from Canada, but she lived in New York. She obviously
Orthodox.
Yeah, I gave you some of her background there with how she got into it, but she wrote The Dialectic of Sex in 1970, and that one is a really good read. One of my favorites, despite it being dated, but I also have to like warn that it's like one of the ones that is super academically written. It's really wordy. It's pretty heavy-handed, but it's good. It's solid. It opens up by giving like some history of US feminism and stuff. And even then, I have to say, obviously I read it like a half a century after she wrote it, and she was writing it half a century after the first wave of feminism, essentially. And like even in that, like that was one of those things where while I was reading it, just like when the like first chapter or two, whatever it is, where like she was naming events and things that I didn't realize and definitely didn't hear about in public school, you know, like names of women who were historical to her then in the same way that she is to me now, that I didn't know existed. And like it also changed some of my views of like the first wave, because people will talk about like, oh, the suffragettes weren't inclusive enough, which is interesting too, considering it was a century ago. But it was also interesting, like, reading that chapter and, like, learning, like, about how, like, there was also, like, an anti-racist movement within that effectively got shut down by the men who weren't having it. And how there was, like, diverse groups that also weren't just the suffragettes that were also doing activism at that time. And there were women who were very much more radicalized and not just worrying about the vote at that time, too. And we don't hear about any of this. I found it in a book that I stumbled upon as an adult, you know? Mm-hmm. Like...
And she coined the term 50 years ridicule.
Yeah, the 50-year ridicule.
Which is that at that time, like, women had, when she was writing this, women had only had the right to vote for 50 years. So that women make this huge advance, and then for the next 50 years, like, society could just hold that over their head. Like, oh, well, we let you vote. You want more? Like, do you want us to take that away from you?
She talked about how, like, it felt like liberation for a long time and all the groovy guy. I love how much she uses the word groovy because it was written in 1970. But, like, she was like, you know, a lot of women were basically convinced they had liberation, and then especially during the free love movement, because she was just coming out of the 60s, how, like, much of a mess that was, but, like, it still felt like liberation even though it wasn't at all. And then, like, now, like, women were starting to notice again. And I think that that's happening again because it's been another 50 years, and all of a sudden I'm seeing hot takes out the ass.
Yeah. It just reminded me of something earlier. You were talking about how, like, TikTok started to show you, like, sex workers, stuff like that. Basically stuff that's promoting, like, terrible qualities for a young woman to follow. I'm kind of noticing a similar pattern for males.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's like a lot of the content that I see just in like random feeds and stuff like that, it's stuff that makes men think, I guess, negatively of women and stuff.
Well, it's funny because with the algorithm, it finds out you're a man, it tells you to hate women. If it finds out you're a
Right.
woman, it tells you to hate yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really succinct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what it is.
And I mean, I think it's also, especially because we could actually measure the impact of these, like, male figures online, you know, like Andrew Tate and Jordan Petersons of the world or whatever. You could see how many views they have. Like, you could see where it's very easy to see how views get started by one person and spread into these, like, online circles, which we talk about echo chambers, which, again, that's a big problem, is, I don't know, it's very frightening to me the way that, at least I feel like back in our day, this is an issue with social media, like back in our day when we were in middle school, high school, or whatever, especially more like middle school, if you were just like a guy who had, you know, rants and takes, you were going on websites specifically for that, like your 4chans and your like certain Reddit subreddits, that kind of stuff was like, oh, well, yeah, of course he thinks like that. He's on. You'd have to seek it out. Yeah, you'd have to like seek this stuff out. And now the algorithm literally just, so even if
It's
you're
all
on the
meshed
fence
together,
about it,
yeah.
if you're on the fence about it, you're not seeking this content out, it's finding you.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's like, it basically, like, on the male side, what it's showing, this is just like one example. It'll show a woman talking about cheating on her boyfriend or something like that. And it's like, they push you stuff like that, and it's just stuff to make you think less of women or just think like that they all act a certain way. And it's like, when a lot of dudes don't see it as that, you know, they're like, they take all of that in.
Yeah.
But I've looked at it and been like, fuck, they're trying to get in my head, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's propaganda.
Yeah.
Literally, you're not immune to it. That's why I have the tattoo.
the Garfield tattoo. You're not immune to propaganda. That's why we have so much Garfield stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a note about that. Yeah, definitely talk about the Garfield stuff because it's very interesting.
I'm just a lifelong, like, unironic Garfield fan. Like, I've loved him my whole life. But I also liked this image a lot for a long time just because for a while I thought it was funny. Because it is. But, no, I literally, like, I don't know, this image would get, like, stuck in my head. It was just, like, you know, sometimes you have memes that, like, do not leave your head, like, a way that a song would. I would just be, like, going throughout my day and be like, you're not immune to propaganda. But, like, I don't know. Like, it just at some point, I think during COVID, I just started getting exposed to, like, things outside of my little bubble because, like, I was just trying to find new things to do and, like, arguing with random people. Like, and I just, you know, I started realizing and then I couldn't stop realizing. And essentially, I just had to, like, take a step back and be like, damn, I'm really not immune to propaganda. I stayed in these weird little echo chambers for years and years. And they made me feel insane, and there were things where I was like, this doesn't seem right, and people are
Like
hurt,
rapping with the
but
consent.
like I couldn't, but like I couldn't, you know.
Who do you talk to about that?
There was nowhere that you could go with that because it's like that was just like my lived reality. That was how I knew the world. So as soon as that, like, anyone like critiqued it, I started, like, I don't know, researching a bunch of shit that, like, was different than what I thought. And, like, there was a lot that I was like, okay, no, this is still stupid, but there was a lot where I was like, oh no, this makes perfect fucking sense. I should have just been, like, reading these books sooner. And I just had to, like, take a step back, and it's like, even now, I'm not immune to propaganda, obviously, but I clearly really wasn't then. And I think that that's true for a lot of people, So even this is like a funny meme image for a lot of people. It's like a genuine reminder. Like most of us, and I'm still not immune to it. Certainly, I just like had to quit social media for a while after I did all that and like chill. But like most of us do fall into little echo chambers, even if they're ones that we like, even if they're ones that we agree with, whatever. Like even if it's about nothing, it doesn't even have to be political. You can just fall
Right.
into like these weird little niche circles that get in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just how social media is, and it's really insidious and sometimes can be harmful. We just like we talk about God, what's his name? Incel guy.
Andrew Tate.
No, the one that
so many of
killed
them.
people, the first one.
Oh, Roger.
Elliot Rogers?
Elliot Rogers. That's a good example. He happened upon a niche community. It was niche at that time,
Right.
and that's just became his reality. And then he went out and shot people, and that's not an isolated incident. And we were just talking like a minute ago about how these things have become the algorithm, how these things are no longer in very niche echo chambers that you have to hunt down, how these things become very normalized and specified to you based on like what you just don't whoosh away immediately, or what is paid for you to see, or whatever.
Right.
So I don't know, I think it's like a very genuine reminder. Like we all laugh because it's a silly image,
yeah.
and everyone's memed the fuck out of Garfield for some reason in the last few years, but it's like a real thing that people need to be a lot more mindful of, is that we are on the daily bombarded with more propaganda in this generation, in this day and age, than any other people have ever been in human history.
Facts.
And no one is immune to it. No one. My views could change drastically in a year because maybe I've just fallen into something else too and haven't noticed.
Yeah, and you have
That's
to
just
learn
how
to
it is.
not-
But you have to be aware of it enough that you can change your mind.
Well, right, and not be that defensive. Because, like, what I always remind myself if I feel like I had a bad take or I failed or something or I wasn't smart enough is instead of being defensive, be like, okay, 100 years ago, my family was, like, living by candlelight. And now I am, like in 5
Yeah.
minutes, I'm, like, binging more information than they got in, like, 2
Entire
years.
lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
It's-
our brains are not made for this, so we just kind of need to be nice to ourselves about that.
You have to be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a quote about pornography where it was like young boys today can see more naked women with like a few clicks than the richest king of all time 100 years ago saw in his whole lifetime. So it's the same thing, you know. The last person I had was Kimberly Crenshaw.
Yeah, Kimberly Crenshaw. I put her analysis in there of intersectionality. I can't remember the exact title of what it is, but the term intersectionality is very common in a lot of spaces. A lot of people who are usually very liberal with their feminism will identify as intersectional feminists, but don't like actually even know what that means. They
That
just
word means nothing. If you say like intersectional feminist, and the way that people throw it around is like, oh, it's intersectional. It's become a buzzword that also means like diverse or like representation in some way.
but
when-
also like of whatever they want. So
Yeah.
like I saw like recently someone use the term intersectional to describe how Harry Styles was facing discrimination as just some dude who is straight, although he has been dressing a little more feminine lately. Like
Most definitely.
Yeah, like, but that's like- it's like that's not what it was made for. It's an analysis made by a black feminist in I think 1989, talking about, it was mostly a legal one. It was talking about how different types of oppressions overlap to create a unique oppression that is unlike one another. But specifically with being gay and being black are the things she like really focused on. She wasn't She wasn't talking about some dude dressing more femininely. She wasn't getting into it like that. It was focused on that. But in either case, I put that in there because intersectionality is something that's really important. It is genuinely important. It's not a type of feminism. It's something that should go along with your feminism, no matter who you are. But
Well,
like,
last
it's
time-
also like just a thing where like people don't really fucking know what it means. They're like, oh, it's like when you care about more things at once, or like have that like feminism is for everybody belief. And it's like the woman who came up with that did not think that way. And I
Well,
think
people
it's
use it
really
as a cop out.
Yeah.
To basically not talk about feminism. Like when I first started getting interested in feminism as like a young teenager, like whenever I'd go on to like feminist pages or spaces or whatever, like on Jezebel, I'm like, why is none of this actually about women? Like it would just be like miscellaneous like liberal / leftist causes, which is nice.
Well, that's what happened. Is
But-
that this term is used to like I said, there's like a bunch of people, usually liberal. A lot of them don't think they are, but that's where they'll be like, feminism is for everyone because everyone is in some degree affected by these issues. That's what they think intersectional means. But that's also insane for, like, aside from the fact that that's not what it means, and I think that it's also something important to, like, talk about, especially like the struggles of, like, Black women, for instance. We do really need the intersectionality. But, like, that feminism is the only activist group where, like, yes, of course there's overlap with all different types of people, but the only form of activism that is, like, asked that of. Like, you don't go, like, well, everyone's a little affected by racism, you know? So really,
Right.
like, anti-racist action is for everybody. Gay rights is for everybody because sometimes straight people get called these slurs, too. Like, you don't do that for other groups. It's just something that happens to
And it
feminism.
also, by making that word mean nothing, again, it just strips it of its original meaning, which was her saying, like, okay, in white spaces, I, have racism, like, issues with that, but then in Black spaces, I have issues with sexism and homophobia, and the idea that all these things are true and they all affect her in different ways at the same time, because it was ultimately a critique of the idea of, like we said, like, people in, like, certain political, like, things, or, like, different political unions in the 70s and stuff, they did not get to escape sexism or homophobia, just because
Like, yeah, the
you all have
movement wasn't
yeah, because
automatically
you have, like,
inclusive or whatever.
yeah, because you have one common goal. So it's the idea that we have to be mindful that people experience all of these things at the same time, so that they experience them differently. Doesn't seem, I don't know, that hard. It's something that we all think about, but just stripping that word of its meaning, I think, is very harmful.
I also think there's a deep fucked up irony in the fact that that is kind of something that's happened, where a Black woman wrote about her experiences of, especially, like, being neglected and not listened to in these allegedly progressive spaces for being both Black and a woman and also, gay. And now it's just the same thing has happened, but in, like, a different way all these years
course.
later. I mean, she's still around, but I don't know. It's fucked up. It made me upset, so I threw that on there because I do think intersectionality is important, but I also think it's, like, heavily misused to, like, defend people who, like,
Don't need it.
literally are not affected by these things.
I gotcha. So that was it as far as like y'all's literatures and stuff. I just wanted to like throw those names out there because if anyone listening wants to kind of do more research into the movement and stuff.
Yeah, like I said, those links to those specific, or like you said, those links are in our Instagram thing.
Yeah, I thought that was actually like really cool that y'all did that. Now,
Scum are activists, not musicians. Theory, learn.
what I noticed, right? Some were like just like online documents typed up and stuff. I also noticed it looked like someone had taken like pictures of every page of the book. Was that y'all?
No.
Or?
But that's what I'm saying. All that stuff is just out there. Anything that we're talking about, like, is just out there because somebody sat down and, like, opened a book page by page and sat it on a copier somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's
They wanted
awesome.
people to access it just as much, but a lot of people. The thing is too about like anti-feminist propaganda that is everywhere is that like a lot of people just do not know feminist theory. Like they don't even
Right.
know
At all.
about it. Yeah, you don't touch on it. When you learn about things that happened historically in the 60s, even though like there's like a lot of, very racist stuff, you still know who Malcolm X is despite him being as radical as he is. You
Right.
do not hear about women leaders literally 10 years or less later. You don't hear about it. You don't know their theory. Like these are not names that are usually thrown at you.
Right.
So-
Well, it's like I see this thing on Twitter especially where they talk about like you'll hear millennials talking about like Gen Z Puritans, which is what they call like people who are sort of like in their early 20s and teens and stuff who are sort of questioning the rad lib kind of view on sexuality. And it's really funny for them to think that this is some sort of new reactionary thing rather than something that women were writing about 50, 60 years ago. But they like it is like an absolute knowledge sink where they just don't have any knowledge of feminist theory and certainly not that far back. Like, I have a friend who took the feminism and philosophy class at my college, just as a course. She wasn't like a women's studies major or anything. And I asked her about like what she read. She was like, "Yeah, some stuff about the 2016 election, John Stuart Mills." And I started like bringing out some names of like who we talked about. And this isn't a ridicule of her at all. It's just that like there's such this knowledge sink that even a fucking like feminism and philosophy class doesn't actually get into like feminist theory.
Which is crazy. It's not taken seriously as a political movement or as an
People just don't know
ideology.
about
It's literally because
Well, I
because
also
people
think
just
that
think it's like
kinda-
about when one woman is angry. When
Yeah.
one woman is angry, that is feminism.
So when they hear like an anti-porn argument, they think this has to be some sort of new weird thing the kids are doing these days instead of something that's been written about for like decades.
Yeah. No doubt. So I was asking, like, I ask anybody I can really for input on like questions and stuff like that. My dad mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt because she was, I suppose, a figure.
She's cool. Hell yeah. Yeah, no, all I have to say about her is like, hell yeah. So this is something I feel interested about just because this isn't having to do with feminism, but just kind of broadly how we do live in deeply, deeply conservative times and we don't even realize it. That there has been no like expansive like social programs in the United States since like, first there's like the New Deal and then there was LBJ's Great Society, and then since then we have just been chipping away at this.
Right.
Even in times that we thought of a lot of times I feel like being socially progressive comes at odds of being like actually getting stuff done. Yeah, beneficial to
like anyone that isn't upper class.
Yeah, so I do think it's very interesting in just another historical context that like we
We've been
haven't got a
ripping-
lot done in a very long time.
We've been ripping like the last 40 years. We've been ripping the pipes out of the country to buy crack, and now we're running out of pipes to rip out. I mean, no, really, that's what it is. I mean,
No,
that's
yeah.
what liberalism
Yeah.
is. You privatize everything, and things maybe look or feel good for some people for a while, but eventually you run out of little bits of the state to sell off,
Yeah.
and
I
you
miss-
arrive here.
Obviously, Eleanor Roosevelt being respected, I kind of miss that because Michelle Obama literally just wanted kids to eat healthy, and everybody was like,
You're
I
a
want to
monster.
kill them. Like, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh my god. I don't.
To be fair, though, the way that was gone about was not beneficial to anyone.
Yeah.
It made everything a lot less healthy.
Yeah.
People still shit on her lunches, man.
Yeah.
I swear to
I
God.
was in high school when ours changed over, and it was evil, and they wouldn't even let me buy my goldfish crackers anymore.
Damn.
But people still shit on her. And that's
They-
insane how people, like, I don't know. Again, like, living rent free in your head, but really, like, it is insane to be the lengths that people will go to get mad at a woman.
Yeah,
I mean,
no
she is the
doubt.
reason, but the types of comments that they make is like,
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's nowhere
no, I hate that. It's like,
proportional to what she
I very
did.
clearly do not like Hillary Clinton, but I remember in the 2016 election, like, having to defend her all the time.
I know, I hate
because-
doing that, but it's like
Because it's
you
like,
have to, yeah.
Stop making me defend women I don't like because you're just being sexist about it.
Especially leftist dudes are like always waiting in the wings, so, like for a bad woman to come along, so they can like call her a bitch and make fun of like what she looks like and imply weird things about her sex life. It's
Right.
very weird.
Yeah.
That's what I always go for.
So I wanted to talk about some like musical influences y'all have as far as like I guess feminists in music, and then as well as just regular influences, you know. So for like guitaring, drumming, vocalists, that sort of stuff.
Feminist influences, obviously, like, though I'm critical of the Riot Girl movement for being very liberal, Bikini Kill is one of my all-timers, obviously.
Yeah, y'all did a cover.
We
of
did.
them.
Yeah.
We used to usually do White Boy.
It's a fun song.
It was fun.
I mean, as far as mine, being that I joined the band and I was like, I can't play guitar, but I'm gonna do it anyway, because to me, I was like, well, if the Germs could do it, so could I.
That's how Bikini
the-
Kill was, too,
yeah.
though.
The early like LA hardcore and stuff is a big musical fave.
Oh, I
of
thought we were
mine.
just doing the feminist one.
Oh, I was just saying
Both,
in general.
yeah,
Oh,
both.
okay.
I was gonna say that, but yeah, especially like the early LA hardcore, like that was a lot of very young people, a lot of people who weren't, could play their instruments or whatever, a lot of women and a lot of gay men, and that hardcore definitely diverged from that, took a hard turn at some point, but the early stuff, that's just a personal influence because it's like, okay, cool, I could do it too.
Yeah, some other really big ones for me is Anti-Product is like this old like anarcho kind of crusty band from like the late 90s. And they have this album called The Deafening Silence of Grinding Gears. and it's like dual vocalists, like a lot of those bands like Naj and stuff are. But there's just that album is one of my favorites of all time, and also like it pops off about feminism in a couple of songs, being like the Medusa one and the Modern Day F Word one, and that was like super influential to me. And also, like I said, growing up, like I listened to a ton of new metal and shit because of my brother.
Right.
I saw, like at my grandparents' house, we would go to my grandparents' house every Saturday, and there was, I can't remember exactly what the show was anymore. There was this like show that took the slot of Headbangers Ball before it came back on, I think, MTV or VH1, one of those. And like late at night on Saturdays, they would play like new metal music videos, and I wasn't allowed to watch them. I had to go to sleep first. So I like learned that and pretended to go to sleep. But yeah, one of those nights, the music video for, it wasn't Spit, it was Brackish by Kitty came on, and it hadn't occurred to me up to that point that any girl could do music like that at all, much less the entire band be girls.
Kitty's
And
sick.
Yeah, we used to do a Spit cover too.
We gotta bring that one back.
Yeah. But like, yeah, just literally that was a big thing for me. Aside from them being like heavier, I didn't realize up until that point that that was even an option. I didn't think girls were allowed, basically.
I think Kitty was probably the first like female metal band I ever heard as a kid, and I just, even as a kid, I remember going, "Oh, these are women doing this. This is cool."
Because it doesn't happen like that
Right.
often.
It's so good, and they were also so young when they were
They
doing
were also,
it.
yeah, all in high school. I mean,
Damn.
girls. Like, they were high
Yeah.
school girls.
Wow. Funny thing, right? Y'all know the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies?
Yeah.
In the second one, right? This just popped in my head. I don't know if any of you remember it. It was like that roller rink scene where like they turned on metal music and it got violent as shit. They were playing Kitty, I think.
I don't remember that, because I obviously knew
fun.
Kitty by the time. I don't know if I saw the second one.
I don't think I ever saw the second one. I think you have to watch the second time.
Let's go movie night.
Underrated. I think it was better than the first.
The feminist analysis of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid too. But no, for me with like feminist musicians, Slater Kinney is a big deal for me.
Okay.
Especially because they just sound different. Because instead of like drum, bass, guitars, vocals, they have like drum. They have a baritone guitarist, so she's just really tuned down, and then a guitarist singer. So that was like me listening to that and be like, oh, like not only can women make music, but women can make music that just isn't really like anything else I've heard. Because like their album The Woods, I don't even really know what genre to put that in. It's like kind of punk, kind of something else.
It's like I said, all the subgenres. It's
Well,
like
right, but no, it's just like, yeah, it didn't sound like anything else I'd heard. I really loved it. They're really like just technically good musicians. And then like as a bassist, like they don't have a bassist, but that still influenced me because just the way they handled sort of the low notes was different just by having baritone guitar. And also Tanya Tagaq is a singer who was like a big like musical influence on me. She's an Inuit throat singer. She's
Oh,
from the
cool.
very north of Canada, but no, she does like a mix of punk and throat singing, and it's really
I gotta look
amazing.
into that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I was like, what?
Have you brought this up before?
yeah. Like it's well, her most recent album is really cool because it's like a glitch hop industrial, but yeah. So she's a throat singer. That's a traditional like way of singing there, and it's just really raw
that
and
shit's
visceral. And she makes sounds that don't sound like they come from a human.
I feel like I haven't heard a woman throat singer before.
I haven't heard of very many throat singers.
No, I haven't heard a ton, but of the ones I've heard, none were female.
Yeah, well, it's because like most of the throat singing is like Central Asia. It's more of a male thing, but in like very north of Canada, it's like traditionally more of like a woman's thing. And also, I love how she's like not about being pretty and feminine. Just it's like the female body horror is the best way to put her music. Like this song,
That goes so hard.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain until you listen to it. And her stuff's all commentary on sexism and colonialism. And she's someone who, like, her most recent album, she went to a residential school.
Okay.
And she writes about that. And she writes about, like, a lot of, like, sexual abuse. And I feel like I don't see a lot of women who, like, are that, like, uncompromising.
Because people
that
get
extreme.
uncomfortable. Because
Yeah.
people will be like, okay, well, I'm willing to listen to your music, but God forbid you talk about this, like.
Yeah, because like she's pretty, but she like doesn't go out of her way to look super feminine most of the time. She's like very comfortable with her body, and she talks about sort of body horror, childbirth. She talks like in great detail sometimes about like some of the awful things that have like happened to her.
Mm.
And I think she's really the only artist I've seen who really conveys like that much emotion and that much rage.
And we've all learned something today now.
Mac, do you have any women that?
No.
No women.
Us.
Do you have any like musical people that you like look up to?
Not involving no, honestly, not really.
That's how you say we found a drummer that was only in one band. We had to grow her in a lab.
It's true.
All right, now I want to start talking about the S.C.U.M demo that you did. I normally go in order of the track list, but like I had to ask, like, what's the whole meaning behind Kill John?
Oh, no, before I say
Yes.
anything, because I've gotten like 3 or 4 different things. What do you think?
So
What's your theory? Because
I had so I couldn't. I was trying to look up to see if there was some like incel named John, some famous incel named John. There's like the term John Doe, so I figured it could have just been like a inclusive like an all-encompassing term for a male. I got no clue. That's why I'm asking.
she said she thought it was about Andrea Dworkin's Husband of Convenience, which was really funny. My favorite is that there is this one man who at a show, and this is how I realized it before I said something to him later, because of all the Garfield themed stuff, he was like, yeah, fuck John, he's having a good cat owner. And I was like, oh my god, this man thinks that Kill John is about John Arbuckle.
Is that like Garfield's owner's name?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even realize that.
No,
It's
it's
about
spelled
men
differently.
who
It's
buy sex. It's about sex tourists.
yeah, sex tourists and sex buyers in general are called Johns.
Mm.
So the men who, hurt the women in the sex trade are Johns if they're not
Okay,
pimps.
yeah, that's the other place I've heard it too, because like with the whole I forget what it was called, the CIA thing where they were like giving dudes they were saying like they gave Johns acid and basically
did a
had
lot
him
of
hook up
stuff,
with
yeah.
prostitutes.
Well, that was like
and
an
it was-
MK Ultra thing.
Yeah.
That's what it is, yeah,
Yeah.
MK Ultra.
Yeah, so it's like more like a kill the man who is hurting you
Okay.
in this specific context kind
Gotcha.
of way.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that kind of what the song talks about?
Yeah.
Okay. That's really all I want to do is kind of just talk about like what some of the songs are about, if you have anything to say on the topics and stuff. So the song We Can't Consent to This, I'm assuming it's about like the issue of consent and the lack of it and
Yeah, it started as like, I think it was like a hashtag or something. It was like very briefly trending on Twitter a couple of years ago.
okay.
But like just like in feminist spaces really, because there was this one account, I think it was called the Dom Jew or something like that, where it was like a kink account, but it was like this dude who, yes, had a rape kink, also just like abused like when I say abused women, I mean like most of his account was him taking pictures of women thoroughly battered after they've been choked and passed out, like fucked up, horrible stuff. And then there was just discourse that spun from it where it was like people being like, this is fucked up. Why would you do this? Why are people okay with you doing this? And then, of course, everyone coming back because kink shaming is a crime against humanity, I guess, being like, these women consented to this. These women consented to being cut open.
And that's what I was talking about. Like we can't.
And
talk
so
about
and
those
so
things.
the response thing became, we can't consent to this. So it's literally about like there's things where it's like in the sanctity of your own bedroom, whatever, obviously, but then there's a level in which it's harm. Like
There's a societal problem.
you can't, if you're someone who self-harms, you cannot really consent to someone else cutting your wrist. Like that's not
No.
something, no. So it's just that the idea is that like there's a line, even if you are consenting, you cannot justify that level of stuff.
there's-
It was like pictures of like women like out in the woods, like fucked up. And he was like, no, but they wanted it. Like,
Right. So like two things on that. One, it's crazy how like places like Twitter just allow that shit to be up.
Twitter's the fucking worst. It is worse than Reddit.
I didn't
somehow.
realize how bad Twitter was until recently.
And it's getting worse. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then that is true. Like that sort of shit happens, and a lot of times like it's been played out in movies and stuff like that where it's been like, yeah, it started with rough sex and then it just led into this.
Well, it's also a big thing is that I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't think a lot of people are because they don't look into these topics necessarily. But there have been so many cases of murder, essentially.
Rough sex
Yeah.
defense.
Where rough sex like that is used as defense. She consented, and these men are let off either pretty much scot-free or like with a slap on the wrist. With very minimal sentencing for killing a woman, for strangling
Yeah.
her to death, for cutting her up until she bleeds out, all that stuff. And it's like, oh, is kink gone wrong? But this keeps happening.
That's a bit much.
Yeah.
Like, look, I'm all about for having fun in the bedroom.
Yeah, that's what
How
I'm
do you
saying.
go that hard?
And you're,
you
and
kill
you're
someone.
saying, and you're saying
Because
like,
that's
oh,
what-
she can't-
Wild.
Because
like,
you
she
know you can get
consented.
away with it. Because your ultimate goal was.
I'm gonna be honest, I would not
that.
think I would get away with that.
But
Like,
it's
that's
crazy. You say, "Oh, she consented to this," and then everybody's like, "Okay, the woman who was
Well,
not
yeah, well, then
here
it was
to
just
say
an
she
accident. It was
consented to
accidental death. At worst, you,
you
get
just
manslaughter.
fucked her to death. That's
Yeah.
wild as fuck.
At worst, you get
Jesus.
manslaughter.
Yeah, that's why I always bring it back to the men, where they'll always talk about, well, are you telling women what to like? Are you telling women like, no, I'm asking you, why are you into this?
Plus,
Why
you
does
don't even
strangling
know
women
if these
make
women
you-
did consent because they're fucking dead.
Yeah, you can't ask her.
Oh yeah, but like even
Yeah.
stuff where it's not like a death, or it's just in general, because they'll never like, you have to challenge them in a way that they can't deflect it. And like a way to do that is just be like, yeah, but like why would you want that in the first place?
No, I just start calling it out because like I still have my personal Facebook, though I don't use it as much, but it's still like a lot of the people from like the same communities I used to hang out with. And so like sometimes I'll just come across a post that's talking extensively about their knife kink now, and I'm like and about the things that they do, and I'm like, listen, have fun, do your weird stuff, pee on each other, I don't care. Don't do things that could end up in death, please.
So I'm
Do
assuming
not
a knife
maim
kink
your
would
lover.
be like having a knife pressed against you and shit.
Yeah, sometimes cutting too. Yes, like I said, I used to be involved in these circles very deeply. Like that's a lot more common than you
I don't know
think.
how I would
Some
react to
says pee on
being
each other.
asked that. Like, if someone
Scum
asked me
says
to
piss
cut,
on your friends.
Is that gonna be our next T-shirt?
see, like that's crazy to me. Like the piss and whatnot. Like, do
Well,
you
yeah,
think? Do you
yeah.
think that's
I'm,
crazy?
I'm just saying, like, yeah, gross, but like at least no woman is being battered.
Right. I would look crazy at a girl if she said pee on me. I'd be like, what?
Also,
But if
pissing
she
is
said-
not hierarchical violence.
If she
It
said,
can
if
be.
she said
Can
like
be.
cut me, I'd be like, whoa, I can't. What? Yeah, like you said, we're all learning things.
It's
today.
hard to even if you can't think like that. It's hard to even like grasp it. That's like
Yeah.
I can grasp
Yeah.
some things.
Oh, I said the piss one because that's extremely common in the punk scene for whatever reason. Everybody.
people are all trying to outgross each other.
Yeah. No. Like.
Yeah.
I learned something new.
Yeah. No. Don't talk to men in the scene. They will
know
want
it.
to pee on you.
That is news to me, Jesus Christ. I guess I just have friends that aren't into that.
Well, they don't want to piss
They're
on
not
you.
pissing on you, dude.
They're just not sharing either.
So I heard a lyric, I can't sit around and ignore their pain.
I think
Yeah,
it's in
Scorn
Scorn Hub. Yeah, it's about the sex industry, obviously, and
Okay.
and also, no, it's really just about the industry. That was written. We had that whole track before. It's like 4 minutes of me talking to our original bassist, and talking about their experiences and stuff, and it just from there, like I said in that track, like I went around and basically gathered intel. I don't know how else to put it. From just like those in the immediate scene, mostly women or girls. I really want to stress girls. Like a lot of these kids, like we keep saying, are pretty young, like high school age, and they're talking about fucked up. Like they're basically like, yeah, I was drugged and raped when I was like 13, and I know that went up on Pornhub because my ex-boyfriend who was like 19, and it's stuff like that. And but all the stories are somewhere along that region. And of course, knowing what I do about the industry itself in the broader sense, like the second verse talks about that a little bit. It's just critical of how fucked up the industry is, and people like are really. I mentioned that it's like hypocritical to call out I list some of the things that they're against, like racism and, incest, like basic things like that. But it's like, okay, but if you're getting off to it, it's all right suddenly. If a multi-million, if not multi-billion-dollar corporation is not only like doing all the human trafficking, like just put that to the side. If they take these categories and fetishize them for you to get off to, it's suddenly like it doesn't count.
Yeah, I get what
doesn't
you're
count
saying
anymore.
because, like, it's like you said, people would be like, "Oh, incest is fucking weird," but then they'll share like a step bro meme. You know what I mean?
People will
And
be
it's
like,
become a
Black
meme, that's
Lives
the
Matter,
disgusting
and then
thing.
watch porn where the black woman is a slave.
Right.
Yes, like they'll admit it too because you can't kink shame.
Yeah,
They'll
well,
be like
that-
it doesn't
Well,
count.
it's a sacred cow. I mean, we made sex a sacred cow, kind of on the left.
And I think one of the things, especially about that, is again the broader culture. All this news has come out about Pornhub. We know that they're obviously the way that we view it is all of those videos don't have a level of consent that we feel is necessary, but they know that a lot of that is revenge porn, amateur videos like rape porn, and still. We'd go to shows and guys, every drummer would just do the little like Pornhub riff on his drums, and especially because that was her whole thing is just that like women who have had specific trauma with that
Which is a shocking amount of this scene.
Oh, I
going
bet,
to the
yeah.
show and hearing that all the time, and it's like even if you take it outside of that, it's what's the joke? Oh, cool! Like you all beat your dicks. That's really cool. That's really funny. We should all laugh about that. So I just never understood the humor in it from like a very basic level. But even like the wider culture just knows about it now. Like, oh, there is videos on there that are like illegal, that are just on this
Right.
wildly popular website.
Pornhub and their parent company MindGeek, and also I want to point out that MindGeek owns most of those free porn sites, so it's not
Yeah,
just
they
them.
got
But
into
Pornhub's
some
the big
they
one.
got into some shit. I
Yeah, but
remember all
like
that coming out.
huge class action lawsuit, not just with the amount of like regular straight up rape, like the type that you think of, not just the amount of like actual minors, actual children on that site, but straight up trafficking victims. Like the site is just flooded with that, and that's what I love to point out, where it's like, how can you tell when you're using one of these websites? How do you know that you're not literally beating off to a child trafficking victim? You have no idea, even if they look older. Like, you don't know.
And that we know this as a society, and then still, just sit around and ignore their, just be like, oh, well, this is fine, because it's just how it is. So, yeah, that's a...
Some wires got
point of
crossed at
that.
some point in the last few decades where it's like, masturbation is healthy and normal, therefore
Yeah.
porn is also healthy and normal. And it's like, these two things do not
Also,
have to
it's
be connected.
very
This
funny.
is a very recent phenomena.
And I can speak on that. That stuff becomes normalized like heavy, especially like at a young ass age, and a lot of guys start watching porn and all that at a super young age, and then by the time they get into their 20s and 30s, it's like, I guess, such ingrained into them and shit that you don't really start to change your mind until you start hearing these perspectives, hearing the horror stories and stuff like that, because once you hear them, it's pretty hard not to think about them.
You said it
When-
like being a meme. Like, obviously people will make, like, stepbro memes and stuff.
Yeah.
Just, like, saying that, like, just out in public, just randomly. It's like, when did that become even okay to just be like, yeah, just, this is my personality now.
The shit that I see people posting on Facebook is ridiculous. I'm like, yo,
People post shit that you couldn't torture out of me.
what I'm saying is like, y'all don't got family on Facebook?
We weren't supposed to put our names and faces on Facebook and like on the internet. All of a sudden now it's like, oh, by the way, I'm just gonna share these horrifying memes. Like, it's again, your grandmother could just search your name. Like,
Oh yeah, it is insane, and it's like I see it on both ends, male and female, where it's like I'm like, I guess you're just like, making your respect levels go down. I guess if you're just putting shit out there that is like crazy,
It's
crazy
the echo
sexual,
chamber.
you know.
everybody else acts like that, so
Well,
why
it's
would
this-
you?
It's this conflation where people think that like criticizing porn is like being anti-sex, and it's like the porn thing where it's like it went from like masturbation's okay to healthy to like porn's okay and healthy. and
Which
it's like,
it's really not.
Well,
Porn's not good for your
well,
mind.
but
and-
what I was gonna say is that like, what do you think people use their imagination? Like what do you think your great great grandparents did when they were like
Right.
looking at the ceiling of their log cabin? Like I
think
don't
your
know.
grandparents, well, I guess my grandparents, like, silent generation. They didn't have magazines like that.
Right.
Like literally, like this is a very new phenomena. Like
Yeah.
parents' generation for me, you know.
That we
Yeah,
just
so the
And
idea
then
that
the
you-
internet is literally our generation. Like this is all extremely fucking new, and the way that people are like,
Yeah.
So the
well,
idea
this
that-
is like natural. It's
yeah,
not.
well, and the idea that it's like you have to have porn to jerk off. You can't just possibly do what everyone did for like the last million years of humanity
yeah,
and just yeah. Anyway,
it's ethical to just think about something as long as it's not fucked up. Like,
I feel like the need for like people to masturbate and watch porn, it's only gone up because of the access to it. It's like you said, you know, they didn't have magazines and shit like that back then. Also, they didn't have the
imagine Greta's
internet.
ankle, and then yeah.
Yeah, when they didn't have TV and all that shit, like people had more important shit to do.
yeah,
You know? People had to go hunt a bison. You know, you
Yeah.
couldn't fucking.
we're just coming home from school bored, and you're like, oh, I guess I'll just beat my dick to death for the next 2 hours.
That's like what I'm saying. It's like it's become so normalized that it's not even normal to shit on it, you know, or
Yeah.
or to point out how unhealthy
Not
it
even
is.
shitting it, but just pointing out like little like criticisms. Like people will like go aggro.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's really weird.
Yeah, that I don't get. I mean, if like you're lying to yourself as a guy if you're not acknowledging the negative things about porn and stuff like that. I mean, you're just fucking lying to yourself, honestly.
So that's why we like to make people uncomfortable.
That's some people like you got to be you got to be
Cover the
comfortable
lie.
with being uncomfortable. That's the only way you're going to grow it all.
Hell yeah.
What's the song Choices about?
Oh, alongside that, like liberal, individualized feminist mindset, is what we call like choice feminism. Not us, but I mean like
Right.
Collective
Yeah, just
Feminist theory.
yeah. Where it's about that, where the idea is not that feminism about this collective women's liberation from this patriarchal system or whatever, but rather about the ability for women to make her own individual choices. And that one especially go into like social media influencers who are like part of that system, where like they will go out of their way to promote things like plastic surgery stuff that like is like the harmful,
Right.
or things that are like actually like dangerous or like really expensive and unnecessary, or all that kind of stuff, where obviously like anyone can make whatever choice they want, but these are industries that are designed to prey on you, instill these insecurities, and then extort the money from you so that you can fix the things that they put in your head in the first place.
Right.
And if
So
you point that out, then people are like, "Oh, well, women." Are
Then
you
you're-
saying that women can't make choices?
yeah, then
about
you're
this stuff?
criticizing women's agency and taking away women's right to choose. Insane, right? That's what it's about.
Okay. So relationships. I was a woman talking about. It was kind of going with the kink thing because she was saying she's
Yeah, our
always
slash
trying.
relationships is me literally reading a Reddit post from our slash
And
relationships.
there's
Or it
so
might have
many
been
like that.
Yeah, no, literally, I had that idea
So
in my
many.
head, and I was like, I should see if I can find one today. I went onto Reddit, I went to the subreddit, I scrolled for less than a minute, I found that one, I said, yeah, this is the one.
Yeah, this lyric I guess the line I chose was, "She's always trying to improve herself to please him more." It kind of
Yeah.
sums up the whole idea behind that.
And that's something
But
a
that's
real
just something
person
that a real
wrote.
woman
Yeah.
wrote, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a real experience.
And like
And I thought that having a real experience rather than me writing sort of like, a parody one is really important, because like it really highlights that this is so common, something that really, really happens. This isn't me talking on my ass or making up stuff that I've seen on the internet or whatever. I took this from the internet, but it's a real thing that happened,
yeah, and there's like a million posts like that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's literally like that's what
What it took you like 30 seconds. To
that
find it.
subreddit, relationships and relationship advice, that one might have come from relationship advice, I can't actually remember, but they're like that. It's like every woman's post is like I've done everything right forever and my man beats me, am I being too sensitive about it? And then every dude's post is like, yeah, my girlfriend got on my nerves while I was playing my video game and not helping with the baby for like since it was born. Is she a bitch? Like, I should leave her, right? Like, it's
It's not like an exaggeration. Like, it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, that shit's so wild. People are fucking stupid. So the interlude, it was kind of talking about, the rights that a woman has to feel a certain way after she's been hurt.
Well, the interlude is Andrea Dworkin going off talking about in the context of, once again, like the sex trade, saying, because that's why I like prefaces Kill John, where she's like, I guess it doesn't really mention that it's about the sex trade in that sample because I had to crop it down because she just like
but
it's from like a
women who have
lengthy
been
speech.
raped, women have
But
been
it's-
bought and sold.
Yeah. So it's like she's just talking about these women who have been victims in the sex industry, kind of like actually being like, you guys are allowed to hate. Like, you're allowed to feel the emotions that you're scared of feeling and then using that as a tool because, in my experience from being in the industry and then also working alongside the women that, have, also, like, the women that survive are the ones who learn that to do that.
Right.
To act that way.
It's sad that, like, even being able to be mad is like a privilege because
Yeah.
other women don't even get the chance to get to that point.
Yeah.
Right. So ligma stigma, what's that about?
That's funny. Ligma Stigma, I wrote that. We were asked to like play a show before we were able to play songs.
Okay.
So I had to
Yeah.
like come up with songs suddenly. So that one was one that I came up with at like my lunch break on work one day and then had to bring to the band like a week and a half before a show. And that's why it's called like Stigma. That was like the working title to be like a stand-in to refer to until I came up with something better and everyone was like, no.
It's perfect.
Don't touch it.
Solid name.
I like how deep the other things are, and then there's ligma stigma.
Well, yeah.
That's where the name came from.
Oh,
Yeah, but it's about this fascinating thing that happened where all those like expletives I say at the beginning are like misogynistic slurs that once were considered misogynistic slurs until the early 90s. And then all of a sudden people were like, women aren't really oppressed and therefore they don't have slurs anymore.
Yeah, they're all highly gendered, and if you try to use them on men, it gives off a certain because that's the thing is we've had men argue like, oh well, if you call a man a bitch, and it's like then you're usually referring it to him as, oh, you're like a woman to me, like get
Right,
me a beer, bitch. Like it's always a
Subordinate.
gendered.
I was gonna bring that up
term.
because that is one of for a lot of I guess sigma males or whatever, alpha males, whatever it is. You call them a bitch, it raises them to like the highest level of anger.
Yeah.
Especially like it's a big thing in prisons. I know, like
Yeah.
you do not call another man a bitch in prison, or they'll fucking beat the shit out of you.
It's calling a
Well, it's-
man a woman, and it's calling a woman an animal.
Yeah, because it's literally a female dog. But that's like
Right.
the thing is that it's like this was like normal understood in like progressive culture and then it just sort of changed. I think it's really interesting. I didn't realize it initially. It was something I looked up before I started reading theory because sometimes I'll just watch like old episodes of Arsenio Hall, like the early 90s talk show. And there was this one episode in the very early 90s where he had Snoop Dogg on, like, right after he put out Doggy Style. And he casually brings it up, which is something I wouldn't have even considered would have ever happened. But Arsenio's talking to him, and he's like, so, you've been catching a lot of flack with these women's rights groups for, like, referring to them in these derogatory manners and, like, using all these slurs against
Yeah.
them. And he responded with, we don't love them hoes, and then everyone had a laugh, and he was like, you're gonna get me in trouble. But that also made me, like, be like, whoa, Arsenio looks scared, and he was like, oh, you're gonna get me in trouble saying hoes on the TV. But I think I say something that, like, in that song where I'm like, I turn on the radio and hear men use women and bitches interchange. Like, it's just so all of a sudden becomes so normalized.
Yeah.
When 30 years ago, people, like, knew that it wasn't.
And we only grew up in that post.
Yeah, and it's so strange that, like, when you question it, people are like, oh, but that's my... But I like those ones.
Well,
Yeah.
it's so hard to use expletives because, like, we talk about this with a song that I don't think's on there, but it's like the definition of fuck, where you realize so much of like cursing just comes from misogyny. Like, why is telling someone to go fuck themselves considered an insult? Why is telling them like fuck you? Like, why is being fucked seen as degrading?
Because especially
Why are the two definitions to have sex with someone or to ruin or damage something? I wonder why. I wonder.
Sex being
I
seen
see.
as an
Yeah.
only as a very like an act you would do to someone. That's how it was seen up until like really like maybe the 1800s, really